Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me. If you can't, then type in the question and answer box. But we've done enough testing and practicing of this to hopefully come. Good morning, everybody. Okay. Hopefully you can all hear me. Try that again. The YouTube link was playing back through my browser. So now that's gone. That won't come back. Thank you all for joining us this morning. I'm going to hand over quickly to Nick to open the event, and then I'll come back and introduce Lucy, who will be our first speaker in the first session.
Yes, indeed. Good morning. Hello, my name's Nick Rogers, and welcome all. I was until last week I was the president of the Geological. I've been deposed courtesy of the annual general meeting, and so but one of my final duties to do the role. It's great to see so many. We already have 398 participants, 399, and they're coming from as far away as Indonesia, Pakistan, Canada, and I see also Milton Keynes, which is most impressive. Anyway, it's great to see so many interested in this rather critical subject, because in my mind, geology as a subject is in crisis. Enrollment on geology and related undergraduate courses is declining rapidly. The subject is crowded out of the curriculum in schools, and geology is increasingly seen as dirty science, part of the problem, not part of the solution. Petroleum industry is now regarded as a pariah and the main cause of climate change, whereas in the UK, when I started my career in the 1970s, North Sea oil was a saviour of the national economy. So there's this huge change in public perception of the role of geology in society. As geologists, as geoscientists, we know that the work we do is vital to solving society's grand challenges and meeting the needs of a growing population in a sustainable way. But this perception isn't always shared outside of the geosciences. And we know that many may be aware of geology as a subject title, but not think of it as a field for them. Only about 10% of UK-based students studying geology are from a Black or minority ethnic background, with Black students making up about 2% of enrollment. I mean, this is shameful compared with the average of 16% for Black and minority ethnic students for physical sciences. It's therefore clear that we as a community need to work to build awareness of the importance of the geosciences and make it a welcoming subject for all students and individuals. Today, we're going to start examining the perception of the geosciences in the media, among businesses that require geosciences expertise, and of course, within the student population, who, as I say, are turning away from geology as a course of study at a dizzying rate. We won't be able to solve these issues today, but we can begin to tease out major themes and barriers. We will then work to build links between geoscience organizations and leaders to create a common narrative and collective voice around the importance and relevance of geology to society and a sustainable future for the world. That's enough from me. I'll now hand you back to Tom Backhouse, who is a council member of the Geological Society and was chief instigator of today's discussion, and to get onto the first keynote. So over to Tom.
Thanks, Nick. Once again, and then as we've now filled up to almost 500 people, which is so impressive to have this many people join. I welcome you all to this hopefully very unique virtual summit, and one that we should be able to do many more of now. I'm genuinely delighted to see so many of you here from all four corners of the world. I didn't expect the response this would have. It's only been about 3.5 weeks really since it turned from concept into reality. But this is exactly what I was hoping for, to kind of, for this movement and this, kind of momentum to cross borders geographically within our geo community. And what I want to stress though is that, considering how kind of how broad this has got to, how far around the world this message has got to, this is a global challenge that we face within geoscience, within earth sciences. But as you probably can have gathered from the program and from the speakers and panelists we have, we are very much using the UK as a case study for this problem that we face. Hopefully, the discussions we have, the questions that we pose, you can relate to your own country, and they resonate to the challenges that you're facing where you are. And again, just to echo some of Nick's comments, I also want to acknowledge the unfolding events around the world as we speak. Rightly so, millions are mobilizing to stand up to the injustice that the BAME community is facing every day, everywhere. And I think from the sort of point I want to make really is that we're taking a break this morning to step outside of our day-to-day lives and address, head on, hopefully in the next few hours, the issues of inclusivity, diversity, and ethics that we have within our geoscientific, geoprofessional community. We have to tackle this subject, directly, and not be afraid to be critical of our sector, of our science and our profession. It's one truly systemic change that we have to make, and it can't be an undertone, can't be a sideshow. It must be front and center in how we reshape and rebuild the image of geoscience in the next few years. So just a little bit of admin before I introduce Lucy. So the next 3 hours, we're going to attempt something a little different. We're going to try and dive into the perception of geoscience, and industries that we care very deeply for. We are passionate individuals. We genuinely love what we do. That's something that comes across in the way that, in conversations that we always have with each other within our own bubble. We know and we understand the role we play within society, within business, within the education system, and we understand that value. But what is becoming clear is that we're really struggling to communicate that to the outside world. And I do genuinely believe that that we do need to go on the single biggest collective marketing exercise that has ever been seen before. Because really, to put it bluntly, we are facing an extinction level event. It's looking bleak, to be honest, moving forward, unless we act together and act fast. So as Nick said, not propose solutions today, to raise awareness, get people talking about this, talk openly, talk critically about ourselves and about our community, and then look to hopefully over the next few weeks and few months begin to put together a plan of action to solve this problem, both in the UK and hopefully globally. So each session will start with a 10-15-minute keynote, and then there'll be a 45-minute Q&A panel session. And we've had a huge number of contributions over the last few weeks from all over the world. Lots of really important themes and points that have been brought up. And I've tried to condense down both those contributions and the discussions and the existing initiatives and the kind of, the debates that have been had over the last 12 months and before, into some hopefully engaging and lively discussion within the panel. The chat is there for you to join the conversation. Please use it just to chat and say hello. We will absolutely go through this after the event and collect questions and opinions, because at the moment that's what this is all about, getting everyone's point across, and hopefully then, like I said, condensing it down into an action plan. So that's enough for the intros. I hope everyone's got a decent sized coffee. And I'm delighted to introduce Lucy. Lucy's a rising star in the mining industry. She works for Cornish Lithium, based down in Cornwall, and she's been speaking very publicly and passionately about the role mining has in moving the world to a more sustainable, green and low carbon future. So thank you, Lucy, and yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Tom, for the introduction, and thanks for having me here today. It's such an exciting thing to be involved in. I think just from the numbers of people that are attending today, it's probably quite clear to us that, geoscience has an image problem. So it's fantastic that so many people are signed up to this event, And I'm really looking forward to having a brainstorm and exploring ideas around what actually is the public perception of geoscience. What do we think the issues are? And then we can move forward and work out how maybe can we tackle it, because we need geoscience to have a sustainable and exciting future. So climate change is arguably the biggest problem facing humanity today, potentially even more so than this current global pandemic. And we need geoscientists to save the day. The UK and the EU are aiming to be net zero carbon by 2050 at the latest, which requires us to overhaul our energy systems and supply chains. Society needs geoscientists to find the raw materials to build low carbon technologies such as wind turbines and solar panels. We need geoscientists to find geothermal energy and to capture and to store carbon. We need geoscientists to find copper and cobalt and lithium for our batteries, to find clays for our brick houses and aggregates for our roads. Society needs geoscientists to understand past climate change and mass extinction events and to predict volcanic eruptions and where earthquakes might occur. If something hasn't been grown, then it's got to have been mined. And this statement is abundantly clear to those of us who actually work within the geoscience industry. However, communicating quite how crucial the industry is for modern society to the public outside of our echo chamber is something that's often poorly attempted or neglected entirely. Mining's relationship to climate change, arguably the biggest global challenge faced in decades, is perhaps the most critical example of this conflict. Geoscientists and geoscience are so vital to people's everyday lives because of our understanding of the subsurface. And yet, despite all of this, the public perception of what we do can at times be pretty negative, or even worse, geoscience isn't actually on most people's radars. The first time that most people encounter geoscience is as a child. And at this stage, it's pretty cool. You've got dinosaurs, you've got volcanoes, you've got fossils. But then, how relevant are these to most people's daily lives? Interest kind of wanes in them. Fossil collections get lost in the depths of cupboards, obviously not for all of us. And, people kind of grow out of it. Then the next time that they likely encounter the subject is when they're learning about how burning fossil fuels has caused climate change when they're at school, or perhaps a tailings dam collapses, or a major mining company blows up 40,000-year-old Aboriginal caves and it all makes headline news. None of that's ideal, so it's no wonder that people might have negative sentiments attached to the industry. We need to regain the public's trust. So let's explore in a bit more depth about what society might actually think about geoscience. And do they actually think about it at all? And is this a problem? So I think that with certain subsectors of geoscience, there really is a problem. I come from a mining background, and it's something that part of the industry really suffers with. I've spoken in the past about word association. So I've been involved in a number of public outreach events where we've basically got two big sheets of paper, and on one we've written mining and on the other we've written renewable energy. And we've just asked members of the public to write down whatever pops into their heads when they think of that word. So for mining, answers tend to include things such as fracking, dirty, dangerous, deadly in some occasions, coal, fossil fuels, child labour, and the odd question of, do we even do this anymore? But in general, they've been overwhelmingly negative, and there's a real strong association with fossil fuels. It seems that mining is now a really emotive word to many people. In stark contrast, many members of the public have much more positive words that they associate with renewable energy. They answer things such as green and wind turbines and solar panels, and it's positive for the environment. However, there seems to be this real disconnect in society whereby people don't realise that we can't switch to renewable energy without a hell of a lot of mining. Whenever I've been involved in outreach events, it genuinely amazes people that 2/3 of the elements from the periodic table are contained within their smartphone and that they've all come from different mines all around the world. If something hasn't been grown, then it's got to have been mined. And combating climate change means geoscientists are going to have to play a huge role because we need to mine more raw materials than ever before to build these low carbon technologies that mean that we can move away from our reliance on fossil fuels. These technologies include wind turbines and solar panels and electric cars and lots of batteries to, store all of this energy. To put quite how mineral intense this energy transition is going to be into context, in the past 5,000 years, humanity has mined about 550 million tons of copper. Yet the World Bank estimates that we need to mine the same amount of copper in the next 25 years, purely for use in low carbon technologies. We need to mine 500% more battery metals by 2050 than we currently are as well. And geoscientists are going to play a vital role in finding and extracting these raw materials. So this requires geoscientists to explore new places, both for conventional metals, such as nickel and copper, but also for metals that are essential for new technologies, such as your rare earths and lithium. The industry is going to be forced to consider new mineral deposits, which have until now been considered previously unconventional, such as mineral-rich geothermal brines from which metals can be directly extracted using new techniques. These are developed by scientists who are increasingly aware of the challenges that lie ahead if we need to tackle climate change. The deposits of tomorrow are also likely to be deeper undercover and in more challenging locations, but perversely, some of them might also be found closer to home. In Europe, the NIMBY, not in my backyard attitude to mining, means that we've been happy to kind of outsource our mineral extraction beyond our shores and immediate eye line, rather than supporting the deposits on our doorstep. It's very much been a case of out of sight and out of mind. But there are rapid developments happening in sustainable mineral extraction techniques, again, by geoscientists, and these can be transformational, such as the ability to sort ore more efficiently, to backfill, hydrometallurgy techniques. And they mean that maybe the mining and geoscience industries aren't the villains that they perhaps used to be. But don't get me wrong, the industry is still far from perfect, and there's a lot of transformation to go through to weed out these cowboys. And they tend to be the ones who operate in far-flung places where local communities might be powerless to stop them causing social and environmental havoc. And it's here that the work of anti-mining groups such as the London Mining Network is so important to help monitor what goes on and provide a voice for these communities. Perhaps those of us who want the industry to change for the better should actively engage with these groups rather than shying away from having any kind of contact with them. So we need to drive this systemic change together. In addition, the corona crisis has thrust international supply chains into the spotlight. And many countries, including the UK, the United States, and the EU, which I realise isn't a country, but they're now seriously looking to build domestic supply chains for at least some portion of critical raw materials if they're geologically able to. So there's a real drive towards supply chains becoming more transparent and sustainable. And, for example, the benefits of a wind turbine are severely mitigated if actually it's got high embodied impacts associated with its production. There have been recent calls from business leaders and certain politicians to put low carbon growth at the heart of the economic recovery that we need post-COVID. And this is fantastic and could really accelerate change. However, one of the biggest challenges in delivering these critical raw materials, which are vital to combat climate change, is challenging this public perception of mining. The industry needs to convince investors who support exploration and development projects, and also wider society who give us this social license to operate, of the benefits that new projects can bring to a region and the importance of supporting the more sustainable and responsible players within the industry. Over the past 12 months, climate change has moved onto people's agendas much more than it ever has been in the past, thanks in a major way to the likes of Greta Thunberg and groups such as Extinction Rebellion. However, the mineral intensity needed to combat climate change isn't appreciated. Perhaps we need to be bold and engage with these groups that traditionally we might shy away from. Let's be proactive and see how we can work together to deliver these shared goals. But we, as the geoscience community, need to be open and consistent in our approach. But it's not just these bad news stories that form part of our image problem. How relatable are we, as an industry, to wider society? I want you to close your eyes for a second and picture... That's the postman. I want you to close your eyes for a second and picture the audience at the last industry conference that you attended. I'm going to guess that it's predominantly white and predominantly male. Betty, I'm a white female, which makes me a minority in this industry, but I'm still incredibly privileged with the background that I've had. I grew up in the UK, I had a great education, I attended Oxford. So privilege is when you think that something isn't a problem because you aren't affected personally. Whether that's your gender, your race, or your upbringing, none of these things have been a barrier to you actually achieving anything. And this is particularly pertinent in the wake of the current Black Lives Matter movement that's happening across the world. We, as the geoscience industry, need to make a real concerted effort to attract people from more diverse backgrounds into geoscience to better appeal to a wider cross-section of society and be more relevant to them. Role models are so important. We can't underestimate this. It's so much harder to aspire to be something when there's no one that looks like you ahead of you. You can't be what you can't see. So it seems to me that we have a technical image problem whereby society is so disconnected from the importance of geoscience to everyday life, and a kind of role model image problem. And these are big problems because if people aren't engaged with geoscience, then they're much more likely to be wary of an industry if they don't understand it. Then when it overlaps with their everyday life, they might be concerned, or perhaps they just don't want to grow up and consider a career in it. Geoscientists are so fundamental to combating climate change and to having a civilized society through finding the resources that we need to build and power our lives. This upcoming generation gap is going to leave a huge skills shortage if we don't address it. But how on earth do we fix these problems? I've got a few ideas, but I'm hoping that today's event is going to generate many, many more. So education is vital, and I know that we're going to be talking a lot more about this later. But we need to educate school kids and their parents and businesses and politicians about how vital geoscience is for modern society and how it's the foundation of decarbonising our economy. It needs to be on the syllabus. We need geoscience to be seen as part of the solution to combating climate change rather than the problem, just because we're responsible for finding fossil fuels. As I understand, there's been an upswing in students applying to study environmental sciences over the last couple of years, whilst geoscience is on a downwards trajectory. But we need to get across the message that surely it's better to change something from the inside rather than criticise from the outside. Diversifying the cross-sector of the industry is arguably an even harder job. White men over 50 are often the ones in positions of power, but they're the ones who then therefore have the opportunity to really drive the systemic change. They need to champion diversity in all aspects of the business. If it's never occurred to you that your gender or race or sexuality or upbringing has been a privilege, then it probably has been. But I would argue that this gives you a responsibility to make sure that you're creating space for those who have it harder, encouraging them in and championing them. I'm not going to name him, but one of the most amazing people I've ever met in the mining industry is an older white man. He puts so much time and effort into mentoring a load of us younger exploration geologists, and it's made a real difference to so many people's careers. It's not just nice to include everyone though, it positively affects the bottom line too. A 2018 report by McKinsey states how inclusion and diversity are a source of competitive advantage, and specifically, they're key enablers of growth. In this study, they looked at the performance of 1,000 companies across 12 countries, and they found that companies who were in the top quartile for gender diversity on their executive teams were 21% more likely to experience above average profitability than companies who were in the fourth quartile. Likewise, for ethnic and cultural diversity, there was a 33% likelihood of outperformance for companies who were in this first quartile for diversity compared to the fourth. Both of these were statistically significant. So to end, this is a call to action. All of us here listening today are already interested in how we can fix this public perception of geoscience. And it's amazing that so many people are here and interested today. We all know how vital geoscience is and how we're such a key part of the solution to combating climate change. Yet we need to find ways to reach people outside of our echo chamber, to start to educate them on what geoscience actually looks like in 2020. And we need to build the sector that we want to be in. We need society to start to engage positively with geoscience. We need to be proactive. Perhaps we need to have these conversations with groups such as Extinction Rebellion that we've been putting off. And I think we also all need to take a slice of the responsibility ourselves. Yes, we need collective action from the whole sector, but I also ask you to think about how you individually could take some responsibility for increasing diversity within where you work, within the industry, and also improving this public profile outside of the industry. We've got a long way to go, but we really need to build on this momentum that we've got here today. So thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Lucy. That was a really inspiring start to the summit, and you spoke again very passionately about how much work there is to do, really. And I think that's kind of something that's kind of really coming across, is that we cannot be complacent anymore, and we need to really all collectively step up to this challenge. And hopefully over the next couple of over the sort of next sort of 30 to 40 minutes, we'll engage with a couple of other of the panelists in the first session to get their views and their opinions on some of the issues that Lucy picked up on. So bear with me as I just add in the cameras and audio. So we should have Ben and Joel with us now. Hopefully, do we have? There we are. Brilliant.
Oh.
You should be able to unmute yourselves as well. Is that all working well? Yeah. Good. Great. Okay. Fantastic. I just, by the way, I just wanted to point out that that Lucy spoke so passionately that her dog joined in too, which is.
Unfortunately, I think she finds the postman slightly more interesting than.
Yeah, this sound like it.
Sorry.
I love the joys of working from home. Even in this event. So I'm going to start off with kind of quite a very broad question, obviously one that might be slightly difficult to answer, but it'd be good to kind of get your spontaneous insight on it. So, in each of your opinion, and Joel, starting with you, where does the true problem really kind of lie? Where in the negative perceptions that geoscience has within society, where do you believe the real problem is?
So I think that we need to do more than a big marketing thing. I think we need to actually have meaningful, genuine reform of our sector. So it's more than just an image problem. It actually comes down to real problems within our structures and our institutions. I think we know that geoscience is fundamental to sustainable development, but we need to bring that into the way in which we train geoscientists. So we need to embrace innovations in the social sciences, in understanding stakeholder mapping tools in public affairs, just as much as we embrace innovations in technologies or in new approaches to physical data. And I think kind of our kind of maybe slightly narrow focus potentially means that we are, we talk about geoscience for sustainable development, but we miss out on a whole range of important socio-economic, political contexts that's absolutely essential for us to connect our science into the big interdisciplinary challenges that the world faces. So I think we've got to look at our sector. We've got to recognize that the way in which we work is just as important as what we do, and then determine what are the steps that we need to take in order to bring about real meaningful change in our discipline.
Thanks, Joel. I completely agree with you. When I use the words marketing exercise, I think I believe that is part of it. I think that they're because it's all very well us doing, actually implementing the reform that is required, but we then have to be able to communicate that properly as well as actually doing it in the first place. So there's, I think there are probably really kind of two key phases there to actually within our geo community to work, to solve this problem, but then also to communicate it to the outside world. I appreciate, obviously, with time and everything that I'm not going to introduce the panelists in detail, but obviously I probably should introduce them by at least kind of their name and their role and their kind of sector. Joel is, in fact, if I let you do it in as little words as you possibly can, Joel, if you kind of start us off, please.
Yeah, by day I am International Development Geoscientist at the British Geological Survey, and by evening and weekend I run a charity, Geology for Global Development, which connects geoscientists with sustainable development. And as of a week ago, I'm also Secretary for Foreign and External Affairs on Council at the Geological Society of London.
Helen, would you mind also introducing yourself?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Helen Smith. I work for Halliburton, and I'm responsible for NEFTEX and some of the landmark software applications. So I work in oil and gas. So hopefully I'll be able to give that perspective to the panel. I'm passionate about diversity and inclusion throughout the industry. And also one of the key things is how do we engender our young people to come into earth science?
And Ben, finally.
Hi there, my name's Ben Lepley. I work for SRK. We're a mining consultancy based in the UK, but we're a global company. So I'm a geologist first and foremost, but we've spent a lot of time as a company and as a group trying to get the public perception of mining, raised. And trying to get into schools and trying to develop a kind of program. But we're coming up across some barriers, and I hope we can talk about those today.
And Ben, just to kind of lead on from that, what, in your opinion, what do you believe is the kind of underlying, real key underlying issue with perception and geoscience?
I think it goes back to school, doesn't it? And the fact that there's just no room in the curriculum. It's just such an inflexible system at the moment, schooling in general, and there's just a lack of funding. There's a lack of flexibility. I mean, my next door neighbor here, she's 13 years old, and she's now choosing whether she wants to do geography for the rest of her life, essentially, which is just crazy when you think about it. So she's not going to have that exposure to geoscience, and like you say, the only things she's probably going to pick up on are the environmental damage and the bad effects that a lot of our industries are having. And obviously working in the mining industry, and I appreciate oil and gas as well, we've got such dirty images, and we are the main kind of conduit in people's consciousness about what is geology and what is geoscience. So yeah, getting into schools early really I think is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I know, I absolutely agree. I think it is, and probably one of the most difficult problems to solve, though, how you get some of those messages across into the certainly key stage 1 primary school education I think it may actually be easier issue to solve at secondary school, but primary schools, to kind of begin that journey and of learning at that stage is, and to kind of get the right perception across that age is going to be a difficult problem. Helen, how about you? What's your kind of views on this?
So at Halliburton, we started, and there's been a lot of questions on the chat about where's the oil and gas representation. I think that's possibly part of the issue. Even in our own community, we're not quite sure what the names mean. So Halliburton is one of the largest oil field services company in the world. So hopefully I'll be able to handle anything that's coming in the chat from oil and gas. But from my perspective, as a parent of 2 young children, it's very clear that we need to provide our teachers with more resources. In the last couple of years, I've had my kids come home saying, Mommy's going to go to prison because she's doing evil work. And we had to spend quite a lot of time with them and actually do a show and tell for their school and their teacher to show it's not all bad. Not all plastic is bad. It's not very it's not very cut and dry. It's not black and white. There is a significant challenge here. And we do a lot of outreach programs with university students, but at the university level, we've already captured people's imagination. They have the wonder of geoscience. They understand that they want to get engaged and learn more. But it's before that, it's the school kids we need to engage with and their parents. I want to be in a position where my team, people who work in this oil field services company, aren't ashamed to say, I work in oil and gas. We're part of the solution. We're not just part of the problem. I think, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Helen, no, carry on.
And I think last night, this really brought it home to me. There was, on the 10 o'clock news, the largest coal-fired power station in the UK beginning to close down its coal component. And the person interviewed simply said, oh, we're going to capture all the carbon, put it in a pipe and put it in the North Sea. And it was just, oh, it's as easy as that. It's simple, it's solved. And that is the mainstream media and the sound bites from some of these large corporations that say it's easy, it's done. And the whole, even the capturing the carbon, never mind piping it into the North Sea and keeping it there, is the biggest challenge we're going to face in the next couple of decades. And that's why we need people interested in the subsurface, interested in being part of that solution and moving forward. The media has a role to play there, because we shouldn't let statements like that pass on questioned, unchallenged.
I absolutely agree with that, and I think actually that should probably bring us on to one of the sort of the next point that I wanted to raise, really, and one that is shared and has been shared with me a lot over the last few months as I've been engaging with people all across the geo community on this. And there's, one of the key inputs really that the general public has is to form their own opinion and their perceptions on not just geoscience but pretty much anything nowadays, is the mainstream and social media. It's how we live our lives now. 20 years ago, it wasn't. There was a very different way in which there was mixed inputs, whereas now it's very, very central around mainstream social media. And I think it's quite clear, actually, in my view, that there is absolutely not a balanced debate on actually solving climate change, and the solutions to kind of managing, mitigating the impact of it, and certainly with geoscience not represented in the way it should be in that discussion, or let alone even in the conversation in the first place. And if you, for example, like you said, Helen, if you're using sound bites from big companies about how simple it will be to solve this problem, that's not helpful in any way, shape, or form. So I think the question really is, are we vocal in the right places, really, on in mainstream and social media, and how do we not necessarily how do we solve that problem, but why are we not why are we not a part of the conversation on through the news channels, through our social media, kind of as a whole, geo community as a whole. What Lucy, pick you up on this. What do you think is the kind of the problem, really, when it comes to the way geoscience represented in social and mainstream media?
Oh, that's such an important question. It's such a big question. I know that my talk was obviously very skewed to mining because that's the background that I come from, but I think mining companies and potentially oil and gas companies as well have, for the past few decades, been really quite nervous of engaging with mainstream media, because if you look at fracking and how, everybody, you can go up to most people in the street, say, what do you think of fracking? They'll say, oh, it's terrible. You say, why is it so terrible? What's bad about it? And they don't actually necessarily know what it is, but it's a really emotive word. And I think because it tends to be, somebody comes along, they set up a really responsible mine, all the community are on board, they get trained up, there's some local infrastructure and hospitals built, local community are upskilled, a lot of them get jobs, and then they're trained to go and get jobs elsewhere, and the mine closes really responsibly. That doesn't make the news. It's only big disasters that have done. And I don't think we've really got a kind of popular representation of geoscience. Ian Stewart, who I know is speaking later, he's done some amazing things on national TV where he's really made an effort to engage with people who are potentially open to learn about geoscience but don't really know about it. And you get fishermen on TV, there's TV shows about vets and doctors. Why don't we have something where geoscience is as well? And people, when you speak to them, tend to find it fascinating because my friends will in the pub be like, so what do you actually do? And you'll explain and be like, oh, that's really cool, I didn't realize that happened. So yeah, I think maybe we do need to not be scared of engaging with media, and B, we need some champions out there to go and drive this forward for us, and hopefully something like that will come out of today.
Yeah, absolutely. Joel, how do you think that we can? How do you think we can create a more unified voice or united voice to put out across both mainstream and social media? Because I think that is personally a very important thing that we need to be able to achieve.
Yeah, so I mean, it's probably worth noting that I think for all of us, our social media bubbles rarely reflect the kind of full breadth of conversations going on around society. And I think we have to be very conscious and very aware of the fact that we need to go to very different places to get, different perspectives and to understand what different groups of society are thinking. Society is incredibly complex, there's incredible heterogeneity in thought. And just as we embrace complexity in the natural world, we need to embrace and understand complexity in the social world. And I'm not sure geoscientists are always very good at that. But some places to start, I think, would be training. So how do we embed communication training into geoscience training? Throughout my undergraduate degrees, I think I was trained to communicate geoscience to other geoscientists who are either slightly less senior or slightly more senior than me. But very rarely was I trained to communicate geoscience to the public or to join cross-disciplinary conversations around, say, disaster risk reduction with the anthropology students and the social science students and the engineering students. Because, as I've said before, these are interdisciplinary challenges and they need voices to come together. The other thing I think we've got to do is we've got to have a voice in policy spheres as well. So I think we need an integrated approach to our communication. And what's often discussed in the mainstream media will reflect what's been discussed in those kind of spheres as well. So since 2015, since the UN Sustainable Development Goals have been formed, there's been a conference on science for the Sustainable Development Goals convened by the UN every year. In 2018, when I went, I was the only geoscientist in the room. They were discussing energy, clean water, cities, responsible consumption and production. UN agencies, civil society, business, scientists, national representatives were all there, but the geoscience community were completely missing. So if we want to shape sustainability discourses, if we want the understanding of geoscience that we have to be filtered through these global development frameworks, then international policy, we have to be willing to be in the room. We have to get there, we have to share, we have to learn from others and be part of that conversation.
Yeah, but well said. Completely agree with you. Helen, why do you think why do you think there was such a, why do you think there's such difficulty to come up with a kind of united united and clear message from kind of the geo and earth sciences, but from all of the industries, from all of the different sectors within geoscience combined, both professional and scientific communities?
Well, I suppose we look to the Geolsoc to be the voice for professional geoscience in the UK, and I think both you and I, Tom, and others, and Joel serve on council, and our voice is heard. But one of the big challenges is that we, as a council and as a society, can speak for the society, but we don't necessarily speak for the corporations who employ us and pay our wages. So there needs to be a balance between what industry and what the business driver is versus what the societal benefits are, and they need to come together a bit more or significantly more. I think we've been tentative. We've been possibly, particularly for oil and gas, maybe tarred with, oh, you're all climate change deniers. Whereas if you look at the majority of oil and gas and mining's corporate statements, they all openly acknowledge we're in a period of significant climate flux and we need to do something. It's possibly a figurehead. It's maybe the Geolsoc being bigger, bolder, and also industry being prepared to stand up and engage in policy, like the work that Joel's organizations do as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think I echo that in that there needs to be an independent organization, independent of kind of ultimately the agendas of private sector business, and also also there are the agendas of university and education as well. And I think both the Geoscience in the UK, but also all the geological societies all around the world have a role to play in kind of standing up for that independent, unfiltered voice that can go into either lobbying within government and policy, or to kind of filter information into the media. Ben, what's your kind of views on our inability to kind of communicate, and do you think we're kind of, I think tentative is a good word, but kind of a bit shy and around standing up for what we...
Echoing what Lucy was saying, we're really afraid to put our head above the parapet, I think, given that we've got these bad reputations. But for me, the BGS as well as the Geolsoc, are the two leading organizations in the UK, which should be the voice for me as a geologist. These are the places I would look to go and represent us. And they're both, obviously the BGS is a governmental organisation. The Geolsoc is a charity, so maybe being a charity, the Geolsoc is more of an independent kind of body to get the voice out there for the people. But I feel like they're both organisations are very good at peer-to-peer communication, organising geoscience events, world-leading research, etc. But they're just not able to communicate with the public as much as other kind of countries. I think, like the USGS, for example, and I work a lot in Northern Europe, and the Swedish Geological Survey, the SGU, and the Finnish Geological Survey, GTK, they're much more involved in society, maybe principally because the mining industries there, for example, are much more dominant, and they have a much higher economic importance for the country, and so there's much higher social understanding of these kind of organizations. But I think that they're just more in everyday life, they're just more involved, and they're just more open to the public. I feel there's maybe not enough public engagement from those two big bodies for me.
Joel,
I just quickly come back on that. So I think for the Geological Society, we have to remember that it's a society made up of 10, 12,000 fellows, and the fellows are the society. And so all of us who are fellows of the Geological Society have that responsibility to be part of that engagement, not just the sort of staff team. It's a combination of the staff, the volunteers, the council that really help the society to engage. And from a BGS perspective, so not so much on the public engagement, but on the policy engagement, I think the nature of science diplomacy is often that it's not communicated, it's not broadcast. There's lots of stuff that maybe goes on in the background that isn't brought to the forefront, because that's the nature of how these conversations need to be. But certainly there's room for everybody to take steps forward.
You brought up then obviously a really important point that the Geoscience represents all professions within geoscience, or at least members are 10 to 12,000 strong. They come from petroleum background, mining background, academia, engineering. And obviously also we're trying to engage with young professionals, either undergrad or even A-level and before that. So how do we kind of come up with a core united front message? What is the message that we want to promote as geo-earth sciences as a whole? Like we need to be able to bring together 11, 12,000 members to be able to kind of be behind a kind of really strong brand and message that a mission statement that we want. What's I suppose my question is, there are lots. Geoscience represents an enormous community of professionals and scientists, and scientists. What is the message above the individual kind of components of geoscience?
Just a small question there then, Tom. Yeah, I think maybe we need to position ourselves as something, we're geoscience for society. And then that kind of encompasses all aspects of it. I think we do need to come together and have this one core message, because then it will be much easier for us to get visibility, whether that's visibility in government, visibility at international things, that's the UN meeting about sustainable development goals, because that's crazy, Joel, that you're the only geoscientist there. And maybe then that gives us more visibility in schools and on social media. I think I mentioned at the beginning of my talk that in my opinion, this biggest global crisis that's facing us is that we need to do something to combat climate change, and we need to do something soon. And geoscience, across the whole spectrum of geoscience, is going to be crucial to that. So maybe that can give us the impetus to actually come together and have a louder voice, be proactive at taking part in society and saying, look, we need geoscience. Geoscience is here for the benefit of society. And it's this whole wide range of things. But yeah, actually crystallizing that down to one simple message is going to be really tough. So it'll be fantastic to see what comes out of today and see if we're kind of vectoring towards something.
No, absolutely, I completely agree. So I think the final sort of 5-10 minutes of this, I really want to, I can't address, at the point that was picked up by both Nick and myself, and also, something that we're all very aware of, that we have a fantastic group of panelists and speakers here today, but we haven't got anyone representing the BAME community within this summit. And I think that, it's becoming very clear, and I think we're all, certainly in the UK, within the States, within Australia and other Western countries within with the focus on those areas, that we have a problem with the lack of inclusivity and diversity in our sector, in our science, and how much of a contribution towards this kind of image problem do you think that has? That when we're just not able to open our doors and embrace what other other scientific communities and industries are able now to do. Joel, to you, because I've for your work with GFGD, you've been able to see this across borders, across all races and colours across the world. Where do you think, how much of a problem do we actually have in geoscience?
I think we have a significant problem, and I think it's a problem that goes beyond and that we should be discussing whether or not there was a recruitment issue. This is a problem of justice rather than a problem of whether we are getting enough people into our courses. And I think we all agree on that. But yeah, so I think we have a problem. I think I've looked at, for example, the keynote speakers for the International Geological Congress. This is our flagship event as a geoscience community every 4 years. And there was nobody there from, for example, sub-Saharan Africa, nobody from South America. And so I think, right the way from that kind of global voice of geoscience down to the local kind of, what we're doing in schools, what we're doing in universities, we've got to do better. We're just not giving and ensuring that the full spectrum of geoscientists have the right platforms to share. And I think that needs to change.
So do you think this is something that from top down, we're talking the society, geological society around the world, the kind of the international geoscience community, big business within all different sectors of within petroleum and mining and engineering. There has to be a change at the top there to kind of so that it can filter down and that we can promote a much more inclusive.
Both. I think Lucy said earlier about personal and collective responsibility to drive this change, and I think that's exactly right. I think we need we need to look at we need leadership from geoscience institutions and organizations, but we also need individuals who have, whether it's creating a seminar series or whether it's doing outreach, whether it's putting together a teaching module or whether it's kind of creating a team within industry, we all have opportunities to do better. And I think we all have to be conscious of what it is that we can do to drive the change that we want to see.
Helen, within the kind of petroleum and oil and gas sector, is this as much of a problem within your case as anywhere else, isn't it?
It affects the whole industry and probably the whole of the scientific community as well. We need to strive harder and quickly. I think for the last decade, there's been a real drive on gender diversity through the petroleum industry, and we've seen significant improvements, but we're still not at 50-50. And there are things that we can learn from that journey that we should be applying to other minorities and to get more inclusivity. If you look at the fantastic book that was published last year, The Oil Industry's Best Kept Secret, it was all about women in the oil. But we need to get to a point where we stop having books like that, because it's just, we are more diverse. But I think if we can look at those programs that have worked and see, well, how do we ensure a diverse talent pipeline? And it comes not just at the university and recruitment. The pipeline starts at school. It starts early, and it starts often, early and often. We need that outreach and broadening of our horizons. If you do a quick Google search now for images in geoscience, you will find probably a white male student with a hard hat and a hammer and a compass. This does not encompass all of the diversity of the science that the geoscientist covers. It's more of, it takes some of the more practical side. It doesn't speak to the range of lab work. It doesn't speak to the geotechnical engineering, the whole diversity of topics that could interest a whole range of different people from different backgrounds. So I think we have some work to do there to break down that image. And maybe 10 years ago, it was a bearded white man with a rock hammer. Now, more often not, that image is a woman wearing inappropriate PPE in the field with a hammer. So how do we now make that image look more like society and really bring us all together?
No, absolutely. Okay, well, it's almost 10 o'clock now, and it's gone very quickly, actually, much quicker than I thought it was going to go. Just really quick fire, 3 questions for you. You try and answer as quickly as you can. They're quite big questions, as all of these are, because these unfortunately are just massive topics. Lucy, to you, what is the single biggest challenge that geoscience faces in the next decade?
I think it's our visibility in government, visibility in education, visibility in society, so that we can actually attract, and like the irony of us all being white isn't lost on me when we're talking about diversity. But, for a typical geoscience industry panel, we've got 2 females, so that is, but, we've got a long way to go. So I think it's visibility for me. We need visibility in schools, we need visibility in university, we need visibility across a different cross-section of society.
Thank you. Joel, before you go, what's your thought on this?
So I think positioning geoscience as an enabler of sustainable development rather than as a hindrance to sustainable development. And I think that is, this sense of rebranding, this sense of putting out, but also embracing reform. So matching our words with actions on ethics, integrating ethics, diversity, partnerships, global affairs engagement into the way in which we train geoscientists. And my thanks to everybody. I have to leave for another meeting, so I wish you all the best with the rest of the summit.
Thanks, John.
Yes, Ben. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, really, echoing both of them, really. But the education exposure, really, the critical things for me, and making sure it doesn't disappear from the curriculum at too early an age, so they are able to get that exposure.
And Helen?
So for me, it's probably reframing geoscience as the essential workers for the planet. So we have key workers for COVID crisis. Geoscience needs to be rebranded as essential workers for getting us through this energy transition, through decarbonisation, net zero. We are the essential industry for that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good way to highlight that. And then yeah, just to finish off, really, final question. And I think this has been answered already in our conversation so far. But who do you believe, Ben? Who do you believe the demographic that we should be focusing on, the people within society that we should be focusing on? And I think I might be able to answer this for you, but I'm assuming it's young children. It's it's kind of aiming it at that kind of.
But also, yeah, given what we've been talking about in terms of diversity, it's making sure we're getting to all areas of society. And there's a good initiative I want to mention, that the Geobus in Scotland, which is a fantastic idea, and it enables outreach into societies that otherwise wouldn't get exposure, and having a mobile education system like the Geobus, which is funded by oil and gas. And that's not widely advertised, but if we could get that all around the UK and in other parts of the world, that outreach program, which is much more mobile, will be more flexible.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Lucy, what are your final thoughts on that?
Yeah, demographics that we need to target. Everybody at university on my geology course not everybody was white, but everybody was middle class and had been on hiking holidays when they were younger. And we need to be targeting people from different backgrounds. And yeah, I imagine that probably does start in school.
Yeah, I think Ian's got some really interesting thoughts on that later. How to get, for example, how to engage with kids in city centres that have, potentially not ever been on anywhere near a mountain, let alone, into kind of rural England. So yeah.
Yeah.
And Helen, final thought.
Yeah, so it's for me, it's not just about schools. Everyone has talked about schools. It's about retaining the talent we've already got. We've got some exceptionally talented geoscientists who are pretty much leaving the industry in droves, be they mining, be they oil and gas, whatever. We need to find a way to keep them with us to solve these challenges, because we need that brain power.
Brilliant. No, thank you all so much for this hour. It's been exactly as I hoped, and I think we've come up with a lot of really interesting points. The chat has just been going crazy. There's 1,000 people watching on both Zoom and YouTube. So you know, we've hopefully reached a lot of people, and we can we'll all be able to read these comments and opinions later. So it'll be really, you know, it should be really useful time after this. So yeah, thank you very much for joining this session. Thank you, Lucy, for your speech earlier. And I'm going to ask you to head off, and I will head us into the second session.
Thanks,
Thank
Tom.
you, Tom. Well done.
Okay, so straight in to this next session 2, and no stopping. I'm desperate for a coffee, but we're just going to kind of plow on through. So the second session is something that's quite close to certainly to my heart, and something that I've been working personally very hard to kind of sort of disrupt and change the way we perceive geoscience and business over the last sort of 5 to 6 years. I personally have a real passion to, you know, kind of communicate geoscience in a very different way, translate it in new ways, modern ways, using technology, blending our understanding of the ground beneath our feet with other sciences, other business sectors, and to work in collaboration and conjunction with often the opposition, so people that don't necessarily believe you're that valuable, or what you are saying has either genuine monetary value, or you know, should influence their decision making. And I love that. That's a challenge for me. That is absolutely a challenge, because it's basically them saying that, you know, that what you've studied, what you do within geology, within geoscience, within earth science is not of value to me. And I've worked for years now to change that perception. About me, I'm not really a typical geologist. Don't get me wrong, I'm as passionate as you come with about this. So if there's two of me, the other version of me would just continue to learn and read and build my knowledge up on all subjects of engineering, mining, and you know, kind of all areas of geoscience. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to jump into the world of work as soon as I got out of university. I was the undergrad student who challenged their lecturer because I didn't want to write a dissertation on the subject that they pretty much wrote the book for, and I won that argument, and that ultimately set me on my journey for the last sort of 7-8 years. And for me, it's within business particularly. I wanted to provide a very different opportunity for students and graduates that are coming out of university, young professionals. I wanted to create a platform that they can be creative, free thinking. They can challenge the old ways, the old viewpoints, how we do things. You know, this kind of question I keep asking of geoscience is: do we enable you know, kind of young professionals and graduates to be free thinking, to challenge the way that we you know, have done things in the past, and to try and inspire that so that we can really transform our sector within business. And you know, these next sort of 10 minutes, what I want to do really is nothing more than just inspire everyone that's watching to have that potential view on you know, what we do. And if I can get you thinking about how you can look at enabling young professionals and students and graduates to be that, you know, to have the kind of, to not have this necessarily the structure that they've always had within sort of graduate programs and things like that, but to also kind of really get them to think about things outside the box thinking, entrepreneurial, you know, really promote entrepreneurship. Then I've done my job. I'm going to try and share some slides now. Nothing really interesting on them other than just to kind of give you a kind of focal point for me to kind of talk around. So let me just see if this will work. Fingers crossed it will. Here we go. Fingers crossed you can all see these. And you should also be able to see me as well, which will be the hope. It's just taking a second to start up. Okay, so hopefully you can see the image of me on the screen, and this is I've tried my hardest to follow in Ian's footsteps over the last few years to try and get myself on TV as much as possible. I'm a guy that in the UK you might have seen me on Channel 5 talking about sinkholes, and across BBC. I did a BBC One Inside Out session, one show. Trying to talk about using technology in geoscience, how we're using satellite technology to be able to satellite data and InSAR information to track ground movement, how we can digitize the kind of the world beneath our feet so that we can provide instant information on that. Risk and reward can be translated in a way. I'm just going to check the raised hands because I can see that there's a few. I'm just making sure that's not anything to do with we are not seeing the slideshow, we are seeing the presenter's notes view. Okay, perfect. Thank you for letting me know that. I will just see if I can display settings. Okay, hopefully that's now swapped them. I'm waiting for a raised hand to say yes, that has swapped them. Let's have a quick look. Can somebody just type that that's yes? Brilliant, fantastic, great news. Okay, so yeah, as I was saying, I have kind of been trying my hardest to focus on how to look at how we can blend our our way of thinking with other sectors in business, and I'm just trying to understand why this is. I might have to just use this. Sorry about this, everybody. I might have to just use my actual PowerPoint to show you, because there's a lag basically on the when I'm switching slides, but that's okay, that's fine. So just to move on really from this slide, so I can get stuck into the there we go. So in geoscience, we're taught to interpret the gaps. We know that we have at best a patchy view into the world beneath our feet, and through our education, our experiences in the field and at work, we, both in industry and academia, are renowned for our ability to kind of join those dots together. All the different inputs we get from field work, from investigation, from testing, from surveying, and also from just our learning within university, within our education, to turn that insight, turn those inputs into information, into knowledge, and ultimately through interpretation into insight. And hopefully this image, you might have seen it before. I love it. It really, for me, just kind of epitomizes what we do. And we are very good at being able to take a very eclectic mix of inputs and turn it into insight. So what I want to kind of highlight here is that it's taken some of the greatest scientific minds really to unravel the history of our planet, to piece together sort of the jigsaw puzzle of time, and to reveal the wealth of resources that the ground beneath us provides us. We've been doing this in society for over 200 years, and the geological surveys are a fantastic example of that, of our ability to do this. In the UK in 1815, it was the map that changed the world. These original geological surveys were driven by our need at that point to explore, to extract and exploit the natural resources in the ground, the energy, the metals and stone. And over the past 100 years, we've refined that knowledge further and further and further through the four kind of key disciplines, which I know are very broad, but engineering, petroleum, mining, academia. And why is this all important for business, you might ask? Well, it's because it's taken great minds to do this. Knowledge is power, and our knowledge has largely remained in the form of written word. over the centuries. We used to be able to influence because technology didn't dictate how we communicated risk and reward to those people in power and those people in influence. And because we were the minority within the geos community and the 1% who hold the keys to all of that information, to the wealth of the resources beneath our feet, we were able to charge a pretty penny for the privilege of our knowledge. But I believe personally we have a problem in 2020 because I think, unlike other scientific communities in the associated industries, we've largely remained stuck in the past and have not really truly embraced the future of a modern tech-enabled and digital world. I think we need to adapt, not only to survive, but to really remain relevant and crucially to remain part of the conversation in the first place with policymakers and influencers in power. So I believe our challenge is to turn the written word, the knowledge that we already hold in our heads or that we've captured, into useful, actionable intelligence and intelligent data, and to kickstart this journey back off again of turning wealth and knowledge into data, information, and then eventually insights at scale, and utilizing very new emerging technologies, and ultimately at a cost relative to the work we're doing to communicate the value of that. If you took every geologist, this is a question that I love to ask, but if you took every geologist, every geoengineer, ground engineer, and earth scientist that's ever lived and combined all of the knowledge that we hold on the ground and made it digitally available and instantly digitally available, imagine for a second what we'd be able to do. We would be able to create this digital twin of the earth that I think is so important and hopefully will inspire an entire new generation of geoscientists and geo community to come through and take on this challenge. Over the last sort of several years, really over the last 20 years, there's been a rapid acceleration of digital transformation in parallel sectors to geoscience. So good examples of this are in location data and in weather data and in climate information. If you go back 20 years for location data, the landscape was very different to where we are in 2020. Beneath location data, really at its core, is cartography and the art of map making, where once knowledge of where things are was stored in maps and in the written word, the sector has undergone a real top-down transformation into a fully digital and tech-enabled space, providing a huge number of industries with instantly available data, information, insight, and influence. In particular, over the last 10 years, there's been an explosion in innovation. There's been a bustling startup community driven by technology, and there is a collective ambition within there to drive change and disruption about how we utilize location data. Another example can be drawn from the property sector, which is where my company works at the moment, where the prop tech movement, there's lots of something tech movements, had over £12 billion invested in 2018 globally. And as free and disruptive thinking is challenging the way we collect, store, and commercialize property, demographic, and buying behavior data. In fact, many of the major sectors have undergone this kind of digital transformation: fintech, the finance sector, insurer tech, CRE-tech, Contech, the list really just goes on. And I think the same applies also to the way in which we utilize weather, climate, and environmental data now. If we look more closely, for example, at the way society now understands flooding, before July 2007, and the kind of in the UK, if you can remember, there were some really, really bad storms in that summer. Before that, flood risk assessment was kind of a project by project consultancy level. There was very little or virtually no scalable flood risk modeling for the UK and really anywhere in the world. Fast forward 12 years, and then you pass the drive from government to make DEFRA data available to the private sector and make it much more widely available in general to the public. And you pass the huge sums of money invested into industry accelerator programs to stimulate entrepreneurship, drive change, and solve old problems. You arrive in 2020 in a world where we're able to pretty much accurately predict flood risk at individual property level, certainly in the UK, but also now increasingly across the Western world and even into the developing world. Such is the complete openness of the Environment Agency data. You don't have to register to get it in the UK. There is actually only anecdotal evidence about the genuine positive socioeconomic benefit, but the signs are very strong. For example, in the EA, there was recently 3.26 million calls in a single day to access that data. So that's 3.26 million critical pieces of real-time information shared that could save lives and property. And what I think personally, I feel is that we need to take that view on the ground beneath our feet and the information and the data that we collect on it. It really only takes a moment of revelation and then revolution to spark this level of change. For the Environment Agency, it was actually Gordon Brown in 2009. Do we need, personally, I think we do, but do we need to create our own revolution in the use of geodata? And how do we do it? And I think this is a question that we really have to address in the coming weeks, months, and years, and one that we must all invest the energy into examining. So we have a wealth of geoscientific knowledge, but we really don't have any easy, viable, practical ways of accessing it and at scale. And what personally do I believe the risks are of not digitally transforming our sector? Well, I believe we may be left out of some of the most important conversations in human history, to be completely honest, and in combating one of the biggest problems we've ever had in climate change. People in power, in banks, in government, in planning, in policy, they have a world of instant information at their fingertips. But ask yourself this, is their decision making enriched with the knowledge that we hold? Is it made available easily, accessibly, at scale? Commercially, is it viable? The climate is changing both in the UK, globally, and with it, there is a real collective drive to change to more sustainable energy and food sources, travel, trade, and our manufacturing and natural resource consumption. But our voice and our opinion that we used to hold a lot of power in, it needs to be modernized, translated in through different mediums, through technology, through digital and online software, data and platform services that complete and drive continued innovation and evolution. Big business in engineering, mining and petroleum, I think really needs to recognize this, but not just do it from within, but embrace it from outside too. Create and support accelerator programs and incubator programs to really inspire a new generation of entrepreneurship and free thinking. I've been trying my hardest to look into, accelerator and incubator programs. There are 181 business accelerator and incubators in the UK, startup academies and things like that. How many do you think are focused even loosely on the ground or the subsurface? None. Across the world, I think, Unearthed in Perth, TechX from the Oil and Gas Foundation, it's a handful, literally a handful. When we're talking over 150, 180 in the UK alone that are focused on incubating entrepreneurs and the startup community for all the other different types of sectors that I've kind of talked about. Now, I don't believe this is truly the role or solely the role of just, for example, a public sector body like the British Geological Survey or even big business on its own to solve. I think that there needs to be a journey. There has been a journey undertaken by, for example, the Geological Surveys all around the world over the last 5 to 10 years to digitize its geological maps and to make that information available as easily and as accessibly as it can. But that journey has only just begun. We need to, I personally believe, we need to really simulate competition, accept that change and take risks, because if we don't take risks, we will fall behind in the way that we influence and the reach that we have as a geo community. Other sectors, disruption has been empowered, and a thriving startup community has led to rapid change and, importantly, to the ability to influence on scale. I don't believe we can influence as we used to, and I think that's what we now need to do. We need to go on this journey to turn our knowledge into and use technology, use a new modern medium to be able to translate that knowledge into data, into something that's digitally available, and then turn it into actionable insight or influence at the top table within big businesses that aren't geoscience, that are non-geoscience businesses, in banking, in finance, in all of these different areas that really do need us to be in the conversation. I think that we need to attract a new generation of students, talent and energy. We must be willing within all disciplines of geoscience to take risks, to think outside the box, to promote creativity and free thinking, blend our skills, our businesses and objectives with other sectors and other industries. We must look at the data and information and the knowledge monopolies, which ultimately are us, and ask the question of ourselves and of them. Because if we can inspire a new generation, we can inspire them to look at geoscience in a very different way. They might be able to, the opportunity might be one which they create for themselves, which is what we're seeing in other sciences and in associated industries. They're creating an opportunity for themselves. That is attractive, I believe, to someone who is a 13 to 15-year-old who is looking at what subject to take at A-level and where to go next, what the job prospects they've got. And as Helen said in the last panel, we have an amazing we have an amazing talent already in geoscientists within petroleum, within mining, that potentially may be leaving us, and we need to work out a way in which we can inspire them to again be able to take their knowledge and communicate it in a new way within business and within education. We must personally embrace disruption, welcome change and innovation, and not be afraid to take risks. So I'm going to just quickly skip back to my view where I can see the panelists, and I'm going to ask Holger, I'm going to ask Francis, and I'm going to ask Rosina to join me on the panel. Hopefully you can all see and hear me. I can see and hear you. That's good. Awesome. Okay, so thank you all for the second session. I'm going to make introductions before I begin. So beginning with you, Rosina, can you just give a brief intro to this?
Sure. I'm Rosina Smith. So I work for an insurtech called InsureData, and our purpose really is to support insurers understanding the implications that they have on their books, or potentially thinking about having on their books. And prior to this, I spent 7 years within an insurance company, and I set up a dedicated geoscience team.
Francis, would you mind now coming in?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Francis. My background is in oil and gas exploration. I'm a geologist by training. Just over 2 years ago, I stopped being a geologist, hopefully not forever. I don't actually think you can stop being a geologist, but I started a technology business called MapStand. We are building global maps and data sets to show boreholes, infrastructure of the oil and gas industry, seismic surveys, and we're making this available for free. This is something that we as a business think is absolutely critical in our industry moving forward, but also to share what has been done over the last 50 or 100 years in the exploration of oil and gas. Share this data, make it available to other industries and other technologies, and I hope we'll discuss this a bit more in this session.
Absolutely.
Yes, good morning, and first of all, thanks for Tom and the Geological and everyone pulling this off. It's going really well, I think. I'm enjoying the chats. My name is Holger Kessler. For some of the people in the comments, I'm a physical geographer, a soil scientist originally. Have moved to the British Geological Survey for 20 years as a surveyor, and I now represent the Geoscience, the Earth Sciences at the Cabinet Office in the UK's Geospatial Commission.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to kick this off with a question around kind of the barriers really that I think geoscience that geoscience might face when it comes to digitally transforming our sector, and I think you should have through your experience at work and within the public sector, Holger, and both in the private sector, both from the startup community, Francis, but also Rosina from very parallel kind of sector. Where do you think the kind of biggest barriers are to the digital transformation of the data or the knowledge that we hold within geoscience of the subsurface? And if we remove these barriers, what sort of new opportunities do you think this would reveal? So Francis, I'll start with you, because you've got a very similar viewpoint to me on this. I think obviously you're working within petroleum and oil and gas, but your journey is to try and make data as openly available as possible to non-geoscience professionals to be able to make enriched decisions off that. So what are the barriers that you faced, and why do you think they are there?
It is an excellent question. For me, one of the key things that I think needs to change really globally is access to open data, or opening up data. What we've seen in so many different industries, for instance, in transport in London, where Transport for London made transport data open, where tube trains were, where the whole transport network was. And what happened is a huge ecosystem of startups flourished that provide all kinds of information to people who are trying to navigate around the city, and really successful businesses. What we have in natural resources are all kinds of different businesses in the different sectors that gather immense amounts of data. And this data is often hidden, siloed, protected by law, and is not available to really anyone. In the UK, we're in a very privileged position where we have a lot of open data release. The OGA, which manages the offshore oil and gas industry, makes a huge amount of information available. They even acquire new data offshore, seismic surveys, and these are in the public domain, and anyone can access them and use them for generating new business ideas, testing technology, testing algorithms. As you then spread around the world, what you find is there are very, very few countries that have opened up data sets. And this is a huge problem. It really means that the ideas that are generated here cannot be applied abroad. But it also means that these data sets, acquired from an industry that in a lot of places is in its sort of final years, these data sets cannot be transferred into new industries. We are looking at geothermal. In Croatia, just this week, they announced a geothermal licensing round for energy from geothermal fluid. Mining of brines, like Lucy mentioned, helium, hydrogen, water resources. Water is absolutely critical and uses all the technologies and knowledge of the industry. CO2, waste storage. All of these things that will be critical in energy transition, but also the jobs that geoscientists will go into, all need data. And opening up that data, I think, should be one of our key missions.
I definitely agree with you there. Rosina, from your side, working obviously within the insurance industry and being within a big insurance company before joining now obviously a kind of a rapid growth startup. What do you think is what do you think the kind of barriers are for geoscientists, or certainly for someone like myself trying to promote the value of what we do and the skills that we have and the data that we hold into insurance? What do you think the barriers are between where's the knowledge gap, and why do you think that is?
I think there's a knowledge gap in terms of the geoscience community understanding some of the business cases and challenges that insurers are faced with. And I don't think that's necessarily a problem, though, that you need to solve. I think there's a point about collaboration and partnering with either individuals within an organisation or more generally in the industry who really understand the sort of complexities that insurers are facing when it comes to underwriting risk and protecting industries. And so I guess my message is that I think as a community there could be more done to sort of productionize the science, as Francis said, to release more data, but then that isn't enough. You need to work out how do you help your potential customers, like insurers, actually translate it and use it. And I mean, we talk about flood maps as such an easy place to start, but flood maps no longer are good enough. You need to provide a whole host of data that supports those flood maps. You need to be able to distinguish between surface water and river flooding on different return periods. Now, for many in this community, that will seem very, very obvious that we would get to that point, but actually, for insurers, that's a journey. So at one point, it was enough to say that property is going to flood and that one won't. That's all they needed. But now there's sort of much more, I guess, compassion around the subject, and also models have been built and pathways and decision-making processes within an insurer that means that they can accept more scientifically based insights. But that is a development, and I think that partnership between industry and the science community really should be seen as an opportunity. Definitely can do more to enable that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. I mean, the whole idea of geoscience professionals actually stepping into the shoes of the likes of an insurance underwriter, or a kind of someone that has to manage their risk and portfolio within their kind of management framework. Those are more in policy making that has to deal with such an huge variety of different kind of social science and all that sort of thing. We need to be able to step in their shoes and be able to communicate at a level that they can understand. Holger, what through your experiences within the British Geological Survey and moving into the Geospatial Commission over the last couple of years, what's your focus been on within that role?
Yeah. So yeah, really good to listen to the previous two panelists. I just want to quickly throw in a little bit of philosophical point. The reason why we're all we can excite children and family and friends on a walk or in the pub is that we can predict the subsurface. We can pretty much say at this point, I think there is 10 meters of clay and then 15 meters of sandstone, and then eventually some coal, and then eventually the crust might be 12 kilometers thick. And it is amazing that we are like magicians. We're able to predict. And why is that so amazing to everybody else? Because everything is hidden. You can't see the geology apart from when you're at the coast or in a quarry. And that is the common, like now I come to the sharing challenge. So why is it so hard for geological surveys or geologists or earth scientists or geographers to share some of the data? It's because it's not just data. It's like in your slide earlier, Tom, it's a data plus knowledge plus tacit and implicit and explicit and all those different types of knowledge packed up, wrapped up into some sort of decision and information. And that is harder to share than data on tube timetables or weather data. The weather is all around us. You can create on BBC, the Met Office, the BBC, and meteorological organizations have done a lot of work on expressing uncertainties and creating nice graphics and visuals. But people can relate to that because they can look out of the window and see the effects and see the rain and the weather, and with the subsurface you can't. So that is a more philosophical sharing challenge. So I'm working, for example, at the moment in the Geospatial Commission on getting a picture of underground pipes and cables. Well, you wouldn't have that sharing challenge if it was about pylons and houses, because they're all visible and everybody would agree, yeah, we should have a map of all the pylons. As soon as we're in the subsurface, there is a huge challenge to sharing information about pipes, which are just 15 or 30 centimeters below the earth, below the surface. So that is the difference. And we need to make sure we visualize and bring out, whether that's through 3D or through Minecraft or whatever the tools are, we need to bring out the surface so people realize it's actually not that different down there.
Absolutely. So I think this is a question. So I had a lot of contributions on this this next question over the last couple of weeks, and I think it's actually a really important one. I mean, we'll probably touch on it in the last session, but it's very prevalent for this, this panel's. So it's about within education, within undergrad, and also even earlier, kind of promoting cross-disciplinary and cross-sectorial education and working for for geoscience degrees, earth science degrees. We have a system in which, a current education system, which it's you have to get to a certain level. You have to understand the basic kind of dynamics of and the systems of the earth around us. You have to be able to have that certain level of knowledge before you can then kind of and I think we're all kind of agreed on that. But do we need to change the way in which we learn so that at a much sort of younger age, really, we are blending our geoscience degrees with things like law, planning, business and financial management, public health, social sciences, so that geoscience isn't something that, I mean, geosciences isn't its own subject within secondary school curriculum, so why should it be its own subject within university? If we blend our degree with all these other different types of sciences or industries, are we then opening up our ability to communicate much more effectively? So do you think we should be blending our degrees, and do you think we should do this from as early years education as possible? What do you think, what sort of opportunity do you think that will reveal, Holger?
Oh, well, thanks for bringing me in there. I saw in the chat some reference, and in fact it was in previously about our Scandinavian colleagues, and I've seen attempts in Finnish schools to teach subjects cross-discipline So you pick a subject like renewable energy or housing development, and you teach all the STEM subjects and the arts and English and everything, languages surrounding a subject for 6 weeks. I think as a geographer, that was always what we thought is the done thing. I was shocked and continue to remain shocked about the splits in disciplines and how the geologists and the paleontologists and the microbiologists, how they all talk about each other. We should stop rubbishing each other's science as one is an art and the other one is a real science and a hard science. We need to stop that because I think absolutely we need to work across, going as far as mixing with the scientists and professions that we generally are not very comfortable with, which is communications and marketing and economics and so on and so on. It's hard, but it does have to start probably in schools, definitely in universities.
Absolutely. Francis, what your view on that? What do you believe? How valuable do you think it is, to review the way in which you study geoscience at university and collaborate and blend our way of thinking at that stage?
For me, geology is an absolutely wonderful subject, but because it is a truly applied science. When we study geology in the first year and the second year, we do modules in physics, we do chemistry, we do biology. We cover so many different discipline areas. The biology goes into our understanding of paleontology. We also do a lot of work on landscapes, modern sedimentary processes, environment, human interaction with the landscape. And because of this quite broad sort of understanding that we need in order to understand the subsurface, we are very well placed to be or have a role that actually brings people together. Some of the other skills that have been mentioned here today are of course how we relate to a wider audience and society, and these things are never really addressed at university, and I think that is somewhere one area that we have a lot of work to do. Another thing that you sort of touched upon there is technology, and whether we should maybe blend our courses with more I guess modern working skills. Geology, despite being very very broad, is very traditional. I think you mentioned that as well, and I do think we have to modernize it to make it more interesting and exciting for people wanting to study it. A lot of the work I do is using satellite data, real-time tracking of things. This is really interesting, and that needs to go all the way into universities and probably into schools. This using mobile phone data to do great things, using satellite data, and actually engage people with modern technology and attack our old problems with modern technology right from the beginning. And that's something I would like to see.
Absolutely. Rosina, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I completely agree with what's been said. And I think the other way to look at it, though, would be thinking about all the skill sets that you need and perhaps take for granted being in this community that is so unique, and that people in business don't necessarily have or even know that could be useful to them. So for example, in the last 7 years, introducing GIS into the industry, but at a mainstream level. So anybody from not just a surveyor, but also an underwriter or even a sales individual can suddenly see geographic data. And if you're the person in that organization that knows how to do a very simple spatial query, you suddenly are adding immense value to that organization because it's still relatively new, and it's actually a skill set that perhaps most people in this community don't value because it's just table stakes for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when I remember when I was at university, GIS was just it was something that it only just within university started to become something that had been a bit of a side note on a course. You could choose it maybe if you wanted to. A lot of people didn't because it's kind of like, well, I'm doing applied geology. I want to go out and look at rocks. And I don't really know why I should be sat at a computer inside, drawing things on a map when I could be outside using, with a pen and a paper and a waterproof notepad. So I think, but that was first year at university, and that's how you get inducted into the degree at that early stage. Now should we be inducting kind of students at that side by saying, it's not going to be field work first, it's going to be understanding how to use modern technology to be able to to kind of communicate the things that you learn, and then you go and you go to the field to be able to understand that in in the kind of in the real world. So to maybe flip it around so that you begin with your ability to communicate and use use technology and things like GIS and that sort of information. So the next point I want to bring up is one, I think you probably gathered from my talk, that is something that's I'm quite passionate about, and I do think that this is something that we really need to embrace within the geo community, and it is this question of, in geoscience, for young professionals or graduates that are coming out of university, are we promoting the ability for young professionals to be free thinking, to be disruptive, to challenge the old ways in which, and within engineering, within petroleum, within mining, and even within academia? Are we allowing that, or do we embrace it? Because if we don't, are we risking falling behind in having an attitude to facilitate and embrace that change? Because other industries and sectors, if you look at the quite widely shared McKinsey graph on disruption within sectors, it starts with a bustling, empowered startup community where there's entrepreneurs who are able to think outside the box. That thinking is embraced, and then it kickstarts that kind of change, because incumbents are then they have to adapt. They have to either adapt or die. And I think within geoscience, within all the different sectors of geoscience, that's something I feel like we really need to welcome. So Francis, you have similar mindset to me. You're an entrepreneur. You started your own business. Do you think this is something that we are promoting within geoscience? What are your thoughts on it?
I think we do, to a certain degree, and especially in recent times through some of the organisations that you mentioned, the rare ones like the OGTC. There is starting to be a sort of a drive for people to be more entrepreneurial. I think that you need some really key elements in order to be able to innovate, disrupt, and start new businesses. You need to be able to identify a problem, or better than that, a solution to a problem, and that is actually very, very difficult within the industries, or the geoscience industries in general. They're normally industries that are big, expensive, and there's very little access from outside to understand and analyze it. What we've seen recently is, for instance, through analyzing satellite data, we've seen lots of startups that are now analyzing these industries for the purpose of monitoring flare data to reduce pollution, or even monetize the flared gas, monetizing gas, methane, and highlighting where problems are and issues are. These are wastes, these are inefficiencies in the industries that can be corrected. And these companies came about because there was an access to data. By opening up more information, a point I made earlier, we actually allow people to use a lot of new technologies and ideas, use machine learning, use algorithms, use tools that require huge amounts of global information in order to create efficiencies, spot missing things, and come up with new ideas. And I think that is really something that's missing, or at least very much in its infancy.
Thank you. Thanks, Holger. What are your thoughts on this? Obviously, we've in a big organisation, we've talked before, for example, between me and you, about having having entrepreneurs who are desperate to kind of change both within big business, private sector and public sector. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I was an entrepreneur, if you want to call it that. I did cause some changes in the British Geological Survey, and it was hard. And we are just generally, as a profession, we are traditionalists, and we've been through some of this in the morning, where we know we have to change, and this comes back to being more inclusive and diverse again. But I wanted to pick up the points made by Francis and by yourselves. Absolutely, putting out data more freely and accessible is absolutely at the heart of the BGS and the Geospatial Commission's commitment. We will be having our strategy released next week, and you'll hear more about that. So we are trying from the institutional side to stimulate innovation, and we have got some good examples. Just want to mention the Geovation concept by the Ordnance Survey, for example, to create spaces where entrepreneurs can get access to data, maybe get a small startup grant. So there are some green shoots, some good things coming out of the sort of surface mapping Ordnance Survey world. But I am absolutely amazed, Tom, that the statistics that we have so few subsurface geoscience startups is really truly amazing. And I suppose the measure of the successes in the coming years, as we put more data out, are we going to see some innovation coming out?
Yeah, no, I absolutely hope so. Rosina, I mean, this is a perfect question for you, because InsurTech, and InsurData is a company through that you actually came from an incubator accelerator program within InsurTech. Like, what were your experiences there? How do how has that changed the insurance industry? The Lloyd Labs program that you're part of, and obviously there are a significant number of them within insurance, aren't there? How's that changed the insurance industry, and what do you think parallels are for geoscience?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it won't be a surprise to anybody listening. The insurance industry has also struggled with reputation, and has been, accused of not making any changes and being quite traditionalist. And I think it feels perhaps on the outside that's not moving, but I can tell you on the inside, it really there's been a shift change. So as Tom mentioned, there's a lot of startup incubator programs. There's really great funding for startups, but also a really thriving startup community. And that's what's key. I think insurers traditionally have struggled to work with one another, and the insurtechs are bringing a level of collaboration and actually connecting insurers together, as well as entrepreneurs and bringing new skill sets together. So I think primarily it's on a foundational level, improving collaboration across the industry. But also, there's examples of brand new products that exist today that didn't exist 5 years ago, and some of them are completely in the geo sweet spot, whether it's location-based parametric products. These things just didn't exist, and they've come out of the startup community, often supported with the incumbent market as well. But that's a success, because it is all about collaboration and kind of bringing these strengths together. And I think on sort of just a higher level, the profile of new and innovative solutions has been raised in the industry from different angles. So our company won InsurTech Initiative of the Year. Had to get that in somehow. But we have awards programs for InsurTech, so people who are doing things differently. But then also industry bodies such as the CII and the ABI are actively engaging with startups. How can we help? How can we connect you to incumbent organizations? And that's great. You feel well supported, and it's being taken seriously. And I think that sort of change in collaboration is happening now from the insurance industry outwards. So as an example, I've been in an insurer and also part of engaging with the Geovation Hub. So there's ways that industry are now reaching towards geoscience, and it'd be great to see geoscience reaching back, which they are in many cases. But I think it needs to be on a much more sort of macro level.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. I think, you know, you touched on geovation there. You know, I've been following geovation for years now, and I know Francis was able to use some of the facilities there in the early days of his company. But there's, you know, the Geovation Geospatial Commission that Holger's part of. It's an enormous, geospatial is enormous. You know, I think geoscience is big, geospatial is even bigger in terms of the, you know, all the different types of fields, professional and scientific fields it covers. It can cover, they've got themes, and one of the themes is subsurface, and obviously Holger's been involved in the National Underground Asset Register there. I do think that personally I would love to see a spin-off of Geovation that is so much more focused on subsurface. Holger can make this happen. If it can happen, then we've got, you know, we can do exactly what Rosina said, which is reach out to big business and also to universities. And look at actually stimulating kind of early, very innovation, incubate the kind of really cool, good, exciting ideas that are kind of looking, you know, outside of this and looking in and sort of saying, well, what about that? Let's do that slightly differently, which is what's been happening in insurance. You know, it's Geological, which is really Zena's company, that's looking at how insurance companies exposed to risk and using more modern technology to identify, you know, and support underwriting on specific sectors. So I think that would, you know, I think that for me, that is something that I would love to come from this kind of raising awareness and promoting it. The BGS, for example, creating their own incubator program. You know, that's something like that I think would be hugely successful. And so, as I've seen in the chat, which is great, and I think it's a really important point, it does start to change geoscience. It makes it more exciting. It's using satellite data like Francis is doing. You know, it's blending our skills with other industries. You know, as a 13, 14-year-old now looking at your job prospects, looking at STEM subjects, what STEM subjects are you going to look at to be in an exciting and working environment after university? And, you know, and modern computer-based online digital tech is not something I think you associate with geoscience at this point in time. If you're, you know, if you're a teenager, whereas you might well look at things like computer software science, data science, you know, and the kind of real disruptive companies that have grown over the last 15 years, 20 years, to kind of compete with the, you know, the incumbent kind of retail, commercial, you know, e-commerce. They're exciting. You know, you're looking at the Googles of the world and, you know, and the Amazons and things like that that have completely disrupted the way that we live our lives. And I do believe that there is the possibility to do that within geo and earth sciences too, because of the, you know, the role that we have to play in decision making. So just to round this off then, for the last couple of minutes, I've got some quick fire questions for you. So to you, Holger, first, what role, you know, within business specifically, what role do you think that geoscience has to play in the adaptation of business to climate change, and the way that they you know, the way they're actually identifying it and then.
Yep. Yeah, thanks. I've just put a couple of jobs in the chat. Amazingly, as if by magic, we have innovation jobs both at the BGS and at the Geospatial Commission. So you might be able to shape the future and geovation hubs yourself. My note I've made, and there was a fantastic comment. I mean, we have to capture all somehow with machine learning, perhaps all the comments. Someone said we are inherently conservative because loads of geotechnical engineers have to design structures that last for 20 years, and therefore we don't take risks, and we are conservative and traditional. And I think that is one of the big challenges is, and we've heard this throughout the morning, we need to communicate opportunities and confidence as opposed to only ever risks and uncertainty. And thereby making our industry and our science interesting and relevant into the future. And one final point for me, which might be a bit of heresy here, is I think we should move from the study of ever increasing detail and thereby facilitating more and more discipline boundaries and digging into more microbial and more finer detail and try and solve some bigger picture. So from identifying more and more problems in more and more increasing detail, maybe we have a job to do in the current crisis to actually maybe pause studying of detail to some degree, not all of it, but focus on solving the bigger picture and coming up with solutions.
Thanks. Francis? No, you're on.
Yeah. Which quick fire question are we on? Sorry.
we're on the. What do you believe the role that geoscience specifically within business has to adapt businesses to climate change?
Yes. I'll try and be as quick as I can, because this is, of course, a huge question and an enormous challenge. For my part, I think the important thing that we need to talk about is the huge diversity of technology and businesses that are going to be needed in the transition that is going to come throughout, globally throughout society in the next 10, 20, 50 years. We are going to have to do everything that we've talked about previously in terms of technologies, in terms of storing, in terms of wind, solar, the engineering, the buildings, the way we build buildings, where we build stuff. Everything is going to need geoscientists, and I think this marketing effort that has been mentioned previously is going to be very important to really educate people in what all these solutions are and the diversity of solutions and how we can support them.
Absolutely, really great. I think that's spot on. And Martina, the next question to you: do you think essential decisions right now? So we can be very quick with this. Yes, almost yes or no answer. But do you think essential decisions that are being taken in how we invest wealth, in how we plan our cities, the way that we, for example, where we build, how we build, our infrastructure, how we use land, and policy around things like, for example, transitioning into mitigating climate change and transitioning energy supply, do you think they are being made without the influence of geoscience as it currently stands?
They either are not, or there's a huge disconnect between the information that are being used by people making these decisions, organisations making these planning decisions, and the information that insurers receive. And it puts insurers in a difficult position where we have engaged with the geoscience community and we understand the risk to an area to be substantial, for example, yet these individuals have been allowed to build their organisations and their livelihoods there. And I think, again, just to reiterate, the collaboration in terms of planning and insurers is all centred around the geoscience community. The geoscience community is at the heart of all of these decisions. I think there just needs to be more consistent release of information, and also letting the information flow two ways. So you mentioned at the beginning of in your keynote, if we imagine all of the geoscientists' knowledge combined, where would we be today? And what insurers are doing every single day is combining all of their policy information, all of their claims records, hundreds of years of claims records. What could that do to the geoscience community, and how can we kind of tie the circle?
Absolutely, I think that link, that kind of flow of information back and forth between geoscience and other industries is going to be absolutely critical in the future. But I don't believe at the minute we have the infrastructure to enable that. So that's definitely something that needs to be worked on more. And then finally, to all of you, starting with you, Francis, what if you're starting university now, just about to go into university, which course would you blend your geoscience degree with, and quickly why?
I actually started a geology that was in the first years blended with environmental science, and strangely, I think I'd probably drop the environmental science and do pure geology, because I've almost had to catch up, and there's such an enormous amount in the geology that I'd like to learn. The big thing, though, that has changed is the application of the geology. You know, it's a huge subject with lots to learn. The application of it now uses a huge amounts of technology, you know, AI, machine learning, huge data sets. There's a whole new skill set that I've had to learn since leaving university to be able to apply what I learned there. But you know, I think, you know, in undergraduate and postgraduate studying of geology, I hardly scratched the surface. So on one side, you almost need skills and work training that teaches you these modern technologies, these work practices that, you know, enable you to solve the tasks that we all need to solve. But you still need to really have that grounding in the topic. Yeah.
Thank you. Rosina, if you would, you know, if you were going back to university now, and you wanted for some reason, for some crazy reason, to study geology or geoscience, what would you look to blend the degree with?
Yeah, so I did mathematics and management, so I had a blended degree, and that has served me well because I can sort of translate some of the more science-based elements of my degree into a business case. But I'm not just saying this from the pressure of 1,000 geoscientists watching, but of course I would have done a geoscience-based degree, but I think still combining it with management, I wouldn't have changed that.
Business management, absolutely. And Holger, very quickly.
Yes, and my choice would be now that I would have never thought before would be economics. I enjoy now talking to people in the commission who are analysts in economics about working out the value of what we do in financial or economic terms. So yes, it would have been.
Thank you. I actually echo that. If I had done it again, I would have done economics as well. I would have joined it with economics as well, to understand value. So thank you very much to the three of you. That was great. Again, it was a really engaging conversation. Loads and loads of information that's been coming in the chat. It's just absolutely going crazy. It's going to be probably going to be about a day and a half to read this actually afterwards. But it's good. It's good. So yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to ask you to leave now, but I really appreciate your support on this. And yeah, we'll see you all soon. Take care. All right, brilliant. Now, straight in.
Thank you.
I'm going to have a break for like hopefully 10-15 minutes. I can go and get a coffee and go to the toilet while Ian jumps in and takes over for the final session. Hopefully he will join. Here he is. Good man.
I'm here.
He's here. So I'm going to hand you straight over to Ian now for the final session, which we are going to really try and dig deep and explore the reasons behind why we have these declining numbers of geoscience and earth science students in A-level in the university. So thank you very much, Ian. Take it away.
Thanks, Tom. Let me just share my screen and bring this up. And it's been great. I've been sitting quietly watching all of the fantastic comments coming through. Can people, I just need an indication that you can see. Holger, I can see, can you see the screen there? You can see my PowerPoint? Fantastic. So yeah, it's been great watching the feed coming through really. And it seems to me there's kind of two end members to it. There's a kind of what I kind of tinkering around the edges, and there's other people kind of arguing for kind of radical regime change, root and branch change. And I'm certainly in that second category. So what I'd like to do is to kind of put the case for a reboot essentially of geology. These images I put into Google Scholar and put geology into Google image search. And this is what I came up with. And someone made the point earlier quite rightly that it probably would be loads of white guys in baseball caps with hammers. And it kind of is, but interestingly, the first 10 or so were this empty landscapes. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of this disconnect that we've been hearing about between real people's lives and what we do. And we're kind of an exclusive club. We kind of know that, we kind of like it. Many of these are from the Wave in Arizona, and I've been there. 16 people are allowed to go to that place a day. There's 16 permits given to go to that place. And at first glance, you think, well, that's a wilderness that anyone can go to. And actually, what you find is it's not. It's a very particular type of person. So I think that one of the problems we've had is we're quite narrow. We've gotten ourselves very narrow and very restricted, such that the kind of degree that someone's coming out in geology now is more or less, I would argue, the same critical skill sets as I did in the 80s and probably someone done 50 years ago. It's mineralogy and igneous petrology, sedimentary geology, some metamorphic, some structural, economic geology course, a petroleum geology course, a geophysics geology course, maybe something on tectonics. But around the world, we're creating more or less the same courses, and we're drawn from people with maths, physics, and chemistry, a particular angle. And certainly in the UK, we're drawn for a very narrow demographic. And I think now we've got away with it for a while because we've been able to channel these people through and put them into oil and gas and mining and these sectors that were booming. And now those sectors are struggling, and we're struggling now, and we're kind of flailing around with this issue. So my point is, picking up and building really in all the comments that we've had, is that we really need a root and branch reboot, I think, of what geology is. And this quote here from William Morris Davis, the geomorphologist, is about the idea of the outrageous hypothesis. And it appears in a paper that Vic Baker, the geomorphologist, wrote in 1991 called The Re-Enchantment of Geomorphology. I'm not going to go into the background of that particular paper. I urge you to kind of look at it. But my argument is we kind of need a re-enchantment of geology for the 21st century. And in my view, everything changed in 2015. Everything changed with three global frameworks, really, that came in that essentially established a new science-society contract: the Paris Climate Agreement, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This was a challenge to science to address the fundamental problems and concerns of society. And as well as marshalling and kind of wrangling science to address big societal goals, the other thing that it had is it was people-centered. All three of them are infused with the importance of the people that are most affected need to be brought into the conversation. We need to start with them before we move on to what our expertise is. And it's a fundamental reimagination of the way that we approach our subject. And yet, I think it roots right back to the earliest parts of geology. This is from Hutton's, the first page of Hutton's Theory of the Earth. And he has this quote: this globe of the Earth is a habitable world, and it's on its fitness for its purpose. Our sense of wisdom and its formation must depend. In other words, we want to understand the Earth because we want to be useful. And this is that Scottish Enlightenment about that science is about human progress. We're advancing human progress here. And it's kind of been bent into this place of looking at knowledge for knowledge's sake, and then kind of as a secondary concern, starting to look at societal human progress. I think we need to get back to that sense of wisdom for human progress that comes through in those 2015 agreements. So I think that idea is right at the heart of geology. And yet I think we've kind of lost our way a little bit with it. Some other aspects. So I want to hit some of what I think are some of the meta themes that I think geoscience has got to contribute in this kind of new world. And one of them is the way we think. We're not normal. We know we're not normal, you know, but there's some really good stuff there. So geology is a historical science. It's got time's arrow, as Stephen Jay Gould, but it's a narrative through, you know, it's that idea of one experiment that lasted 4.5 billion years. Time is really useful. It actually gives us a very strong narrative. And then one of the reasons why geoscience works with some of the other historical sciences really well on television. Secondly, it's a derivative science. We steal from everywhere. We steal from maths and physics and biology and chemistry. And people have already mentioned that. And we meld it together. And that actually creates a new type of science that's very, very interactive and integrative. And then finally, it's an interpretative science. You know, it's very subjective. You get 4 geologists sitting at standing by the same outcrop, and they're all arguing. And they're arguing about fine detail. A lot of it is interpretation. And I think those 3 elements of knowing the past, being able to combine sciences, and then not be afraid of subjectivity seem to be absolutely critical to many of the challenges that we face looking ahead. So I think emphasizing that rather than the hard technical skills, actually it's the mental skills that a geoscientist brings is really important for our students and for the wider message. We've had a lot about big data. It's here. Big data is here. Digitalization is transforming the industries that our geoscientists are getting into. Data mining, artificial intelligence, machine learning. We've already had, geospatial GIS is already embedded in most geoscience courses, but there's new stuff coming in. Drones and smart sensor systems. So one of the challenges, I think, is kind of twofold. Where does a geoscientist fit into these things? and how will the geoscientists operate with them in industry? So for example, drones, I was hearing someone from the oil industry was telling me the other day in the States now, one of the key things that gets you a job is whether you get a drone license. So is that something that we teach people in our undergraduate courses, is, you know, drones and collection? I mean, it's going to make them very employable. How much data science, data analytics are we going to put into a geoscience course before it becomes a data science course? And where is that's a balancing act that I don't think we've really worked out, but it's in there and it's definitely going to be part of that future. The notion that there's new metals, you know, the idea that the carbon, if somehow the hydrocarbon problems, that the carbon age is over, is refuted by the fact that graphene, which is a structure you see there in the background, has transformed the way we think. Material science is now one of the most exciting frontiers around. And I think that this notion, that the quote there from Morton Smellerod's paper about geology in 2058, and this idea of the green stone age, that essentially the role of the geologist is to exploit and understand the periodic table from the point of view of how we extract it and what it's useful for. So that idea of geometallurgy, I think, sits, in other words, it's not just explaining the mineralogy of these things, it's what the hell they're useful for and why it is that society needs this stuff. And I think that utility of geomaterials is going to be a key point. This has been mentioned in many places, the notion of the hidden commons. So down there is our world. Underneath the ground, dig more than a few meters and you're into the geology world. And it's completely unique. And it's something that most normal, ordinary people don't understand. It's our world. And it features in so many of our different courses, you know, so our petroleum geoscience and economic geology, for those who still have hydrogeology or hydrogeology. To my mind, the point is that we really need to see it as subsurface science. The same skill sets of imaging and exploring the subsurface you can use for oil as you can use for water. One is seen as bad, one is seen as good. It's the same techniques. So down there, it's exploring geoscience for resources, but also for heat. We've heard about geothermal. Mining heat is a key thing, and also putting stuff back, the age of insertion, carbon capture storage, rad waste, all demand this understanding of subsurface science. That's what distinguishes from geographers. That's what distinguishes us from upstairs, is the knowledge that we understand, I think we do, the subsurface. Relating to that is the notion that of the urban geology. So something like 55% of the world's population live in cities now, and that's only going to increase. The remarkable statistic is by 2030, 60% of the urban space that we expect in 2030 has not been built yet. So we've got tremendous urban transformation taking place. The second thing is climate change. Climate change is going to be accentuated, exacerbated in cities. Some parts of the tropics are going to be almost unlivable as a result of the temperature changes and the heat island effects. So it seems to me that one of the big movers is going to be subterranean urbanism, is using underground space. And what's holding that back is really poor spatial planning for the subsurface, because geologists aren't in there. And that's been touched on by Holger and other people. But the point is, geoscientists need to get into this area of urban geoscience. And that's a world away from those pictures of the desert in Arizona and this is people's everyday world, and geoscientists need to be there. Relating to that is the notion that's come through over the last 10 years of the critical zone and critical zone science, which is this idea. It's from the canopy all the way down to the base of the groundwater flow. It's these biological, physical, chemical interactions in that narrow living space that is essentially gives us everything we've got. And so to my mind, that integrative science of the critical zone, not just in the natural areas, but increasingly, as I've just said, with urban areas, is going to be critical. It's going to be critical for geohealth. That fundamentally fits into many of the challenges for food security. And so these are the things that really need to be brought together. We already study this stuff with geochemistry in a whole different ways, but it's really just focusing it into the areas that are of public concern. We talk a lot about how, geology is great because we study earthquakes and volcanoes, but you know, one of the things that's happened in the last decade or so is a realization of these knock-on cascading compound hazards. So this image is of the Tohoku earthquake in 2011, you know, which is an earthquake and a tsunami, knocks out a nuclear plant, sends Germany to stop its nuclear power station, sends Japan to start increasing the number of coal-fired and oil-fired power stations and increase its carbon footprint. And this quote is from Mark Gordon at the UN Office of Disaster Risk Reduction. And his point is, you know, that COVID-19 just exposed the fact that we, as an academic community, we've been fixated by understanding hazard by hazard, siloed views of where risk lies. But real risk explodes across the planet in all sorts of unexpected ways. It cascades through the economic, social, political system. And so systemic risk is going to have to be an issue. And I put the flyer up for a project that I'm involved in, and several people on the chat are involved in, on Tomorrow's Cities, which is connecting geoscientists, geophysicists, hazard specialists with social scientists, economists, anthropologists, trying to understand urban disaster risk in a completely holistic way. And I think that is going to be one of the critical features. So no more individually breaking up the hazards into certain categories, actually blending them all. And the other kind of final one is, that's again something that's come up in a few places, the idea that we are Earth stewards. We understand the planet in its totality, its systems, the way it operates. And that means we understand its planetary boundaries and the extent to which we can get to close to or overcome those planetary boundaries. So this image here is, many people will recognize, is up in Bolivia in Altiplano, where 30% of the world's lithium reserves sit there in this world, pristine, beautiful UNESCO World Heritage Sites. You know, as we move into that future world that Lucy spoke very eloquently of right at the start, we're going to need many of these materials, but balancing that is going to be really important. Now, Earth stewardship's really come out, but it's come out of ecology. It's ecologists that are pushing this. The geoscientists have been very slow to get into that. We kind of feel it's someone else's business. And with that comes geoethics. And I'll put up this quote from the science historian Naomi Oreskes, about many of environmental claims are not so much about life's qualities as quantities, about qualities. They're aesthetic and moral choices. They're about equity and ethics. And I think that this harps back to some of the stuff that Joel was talking about early on, the first ones, that we need to stand back and think of what is the purpose of geoscience in the modern world? What are we actually doing with this? And I think these are deeply ethical aspects about social justice and equity, and geologists are critical parts of that. And then my last slide, again, really alluding to the events of the last week, which has really shook everyone, I think, is I think one of the arguments is geology's become too narrow. We've drawn from a small pool of places with a small set of discipline, and for a while it's worked. But now we're opening up, and if we're going to really address all these different aspects of the world's kind of big societal problems that I think relate to the planet, and I think we need to be there, we need to have much greater diversity in our ranks. And I'm drawn to this Ashby's law of requisite variety, which is from biology, but it's been used a lot in business, which is to survive, organic systems need a degree of complexity equivalent to the complexity of the environment with which we're interacting. And I think that's one of the fundamental reasons for what we're struggling with at the moment, is that we're trying to address this broad panoply of issues with a very insular, narrow set of skills and also outlooks and people. And I think that graph that we see behind us, which is the downturn that people are quite familiar with, I think, in terms of numbers going in from A-level geology, but it then knocks on into universities, is that we lack that inspirational stroke aspirational call for why people should do geoscience. People are getting into biotech, they're getting into material science, they're getting into quantum computing, they're getting into AI. These are the exciting frontiers. Why would you do geology? Unless we can make geology, we can sell geology as a critical, exciting, inspirational subject that's really relevant for everyday people in the 21st century, this will be an existential threat. And so I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks. That was, I'm still kind of writing some notes quickly on all those slides that you put down, because it's quite a lot of information in there. And but absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much for speaking, as you always do, so eloquently on the subject. I think one of the things that that was really clear from it all is that I think we know how to. I think we know just how exciting our subject can be, already is, and you know, I think within our within the geo community, I think Joel did say earlier, and I agree with him, that there needs to be reform within certain areas of the way that we act, our working environment, how we deal with some of the problems around inclusivity and diversity. But I also do really truly believe, as we spoke the other day about, we need to just get better at communicating and marketing our role and our value, because just from your slides then you can see quite clearly how you know, how kind of diverse and exciting a sort of subject this is.
Can I come back to one point on that marketing? Because I agree with the marketing, but I think we need to clarify it a little bit, because for most people, marketing is the problem. It's that consumer society, and we think of marketing as this thing that makes us buy things we don't really need. But marketing is the interface between an organization and its customer base, an organization and its public. And my view is that's exactly where we are. We are the interface between geoscience and the public that needs geoscience. So in that sense, I think if we can capture some of the essence of how you work with audiences and understand what they need for us, then in that sense, I think marketing is the way. I don't think, and I don't think you mean this either, that it's just a bland campaign that we need in order to convince people. So I think we need to be clear on what we mean by marketing in that context.
No, and I think you're absolutely spot on with that. I'm going to invite Marie, Natasha, and Catherine to join us now. Hi all. Hope you're all okay and enjoyed the session so far.
Yeah. Good morning.
I'm going to ask you to Natasha, Marie, and Catherine to please introduce yourselves to everybody. Natasha, can I start with you?
Hi everyone. I am a geology lecturer at the University of Hull. I recently joined academia, back to academia. Previously, I worked for 7 years in the oil and gas industry. And back in January, I started a website called Geoscience for the Future, aimed at trying to highlight some of these really positive stories about what geoscientists do.
Thank you. Marie?
Hi, my name is Mary Kyan. I'm one of the senior management team of the British Geological Survey, and I run the Geological Survey of Northern Ireland. I'm also a member of the Institute of Directors and a member of the Royal Irish Academy, and I've been passionate about earth science issues since 2004, and lots of lessons learned from Northern Ireland to apply to some of the key questions here.
Thank you. And Catherine?
Hiya, I'm Catherine Owen, and I am a geography teacher. I teach in a 11 to 18 comprehensive school, and a few years ago I was lucky enough to take part in the Geoscience Education Academy, which was organised by some fab people in Esther. A big shout out to Pete Loader, who is absolutely fantastic. And so I got interested in geosciences, and so I'm here really to think about some of the practicalities. A lot of people have been saying, let's do more in schools, but what would that practically involve? You know, what is the context that we're working in schools?
Yeah, absolutely. I think your insight's going to be really, really important here. Okay, so I'm just going to start off this panel with this stat that Pete has shared with me, and I think that you've all seen now in the last couple of days. But so, you know, universities, as I can gather from what I've read and the conversations I've had over the last few months, is this has been something that's been being shouted from either individual universities or now more so a collective kind of shout from all universities, that there's been this decline in the number of students for a while now. And the likes of Pete Loader and Chris King and others have put together some stats on this. And I think one of the most striking ones is this one. So in 2019, there were only 1,268 teenagers that chose to take geology at A level. So that's almost a 50% decline down on 2015, so in a couple of years before that. And in that same year, 45% of all university enrollment into geoscience degrees came from the 1,200 that had studied A-level geology. So, I mean, the maths is quite simple on that. It's, you know, if if A-level geology, kind of continues to decline as it is, then, you're almost wiping out half of all enrollment into the university to study geoscience. And there's also, just to pick up on Steve Brace's image that was circulating yesterday that I think is really pertinent to this conversation, which is about geography students and where geography at A-level go into university. And it was pretty damning. There was only a sort of a few percent that actually go from geography through to university and into physical and earth sciences or geoscience, which I think, if we're cutting off A-level geology and there's a decline there, and then we're also not seeing an increase in the number of geography A-level students that are going through to university study geoscience, where are they coming from? And in 2-3 years time, how many have we got left? So hopefully this panel, like I said right at the start, not about solutions, about trying to get insight into the different kind of areas of education, secondary school, university, extracurricular outside of school, and then hopefully we can kind of condense that down in the next couple of weeks in something that resembles some form of a plan. So this is nice, broad, big question to you all. Natasha, in your own words, why do you think the number of geo-earth science is falling so fast, and why do you think it's now over the last kind of 18 months to sort of 2-3 years?
So before I start, I think it's really important to flag again the important work that people like the Earth Science Teachers Association and UG UK have done in this area. There have been people working a lot on these issues. And I guess one of the first questions we have to ask is, why don't people know about that more? Why isn't that being supported more, and what more can we do to support that? I know we're not looking at solutions here, but that is a really important question, I think. I guess my summary is, we're doing it wrong. We need to have more introspection. We have made mistakes. And I think we talk a lot about perceptions, but we control that to a certain extent. We can't just blame it on the media. We can't just say, oh, these perceptions are here. Why doesn't everyone understand how amazing geoscience is? If we feel that passion, and there's so many of us feeling that much passion, why do they not know about it? And that is our fault as a community. And I think there needs to be a lot more introspection about that issue. For me, there's kind of 4 key areas that are related to this decline. And this isn't just from my relative inexperience in academia so far. This is from talking to a number of my very experienced colleagues over these weeks. Student awareness is a problem, and I'm sure that we can discuss that more on this panel. It's no longer as prominent in the school curriculum as it should be, as we believe it should be. I've had a physics A-level student wander by accident into a Hull Open Day and into the geology room. And after 10 minutes of talking about earthquakes, she left euphoric. She had never even heard of geophysics. Just that 10-minute conversation may have changed the choices that she makes. And we can't underestimate those one-on-one interactions. And how can we get more of those with students? How can we put our passion in the right place? How can we support teachers to make sure that that's happening? Perceptions we talked a lot about. Clearly, we're suffering a massive perception problem. When I worked in industry, I had my ethics questioned all over the place. Ethics question online, ethics question to my face by students I was teaching. I know colleagues who've been heckled and harassed. We have simply not done enough to promote what we do. And I think industry have become very defensive and scared. I think industry are scared now about reaching out because of the PR ramifications that will have. And again, that's a big question. How can we change that? How can we make industry understand that they have to be brave and be progressive and step out of their comfort zone to actually ignite those young people? Because at the moment, that is a big problem. Diversity is huge. As Tom knows, I had some reservations about being on this panel because it's all white, and that's a massive problem. We can't shy away from that. This is a panel about the future of geoscience. We are not diverse. Our subject is not diverse. We are not engaging with diverse communities. And that is our fault. And we need to figure out what to do about that. We need to listen. We need to be introspective. We need to listen to those communities. And also there are voices out there. There are diverse voices out there, but we're not hearing from them enough. There are people who on Twitter, on social media, are there and they're saying, we're here, we're a minority in STEM, listen to us. And yet often we find ourselves in an echo chamber listening to the same voices. And I think another problem for me, so kind of subject awareness, perceptions, diversity, there's a lot, also accessibility. Our accreditation system means that we have to have a certain amount of time in the field. Now, field trips are a thing that we love. Most people who do geology are passionate about being in the field, right? It's something we all enjoy. But in this modern world, is that a barrier? Clearly, it must be a barrier to accessibility for people from a wide range of abilities and backgrounds, not just in terms of lesser abled people, but also people who may have caring responsibilities, who may need to work a job alongside their studies, who may not be able to afford or may perceive that they can't afford to do a geology degree because of the amount of travel. So sorry, that was a lot, but yeah, those are just some of the brain dump of issues that I think we are facing here. And I think the biggest issue is us being honest and accepting that these are our problems to deal with.
Absolutely, and I think that really ultimately was my goal for this event, to be critical of ourselves and honest and open about the fact that we have failed in certain elements, in a lot of elements of of the points you made around accessibility, diversity, awareness within all levels of the education and curriculum. And so yeah, really thank you for that. And I made quite a lot of notes. Murray, what's your input on this?
Okay, Tom, I think first of all, I would echo a lot of Ian's comments and Natasha's. I think as a sector, we're not strategic. Okay, I mean, if you at the outset, you gave some examples of statistics coming through from ESTA. If you look at the today UK government's shortage occupation list, that list contains a list of geoscientists as long as your arm, and has done for the last 10 years. So the demand is there to the extent that the government recognises it's actually a key skill in terms of visa requirements. I looked at the last time we did an economic assessment of the value of our sector to the UK, and I don't think, unless I'm happy to be corrected, anything was done pan-UK since the late 1990s. I know, for example, Northern Ireland and Ireland have done this in the last couple of years. So, for example, in Northern Ireland alone, which has a population of 1.77 million, 5% of Northern Irish jobs are in the geo economy. 9% of greater salary relative to other industries, and 8% of the total businesses in Northern Ireland, including over 6,000 businesses. Again, if you look at the skills barometer in Northern Ireland, they look forward to 20 to 28, and they've identified engineering, technology, maths, computing, physical and environmental sciences as the key disciplines in undersupply. So the demand is there, okay? We've proven the demand is there, supply. So we in Northern Ireland are probably have realised this probably as early as 2000, and we have the unenviable position of the UK has actually been further declined than the current state of affairs, which the Geological has picked up on. So, for example, as part of this, I consulted the 2 existing geology teachers in Northern Ireland. So when they started 35 years ago, when I was basically starting secondary school, there were 14 schools teaching geology in Northern Ireland. There are now 2. There are no succession plans, to my knowledge, for the continuation of those subjects when those teachers retire. The Queen's University Belfast Geology Department was closed in 2002. I was one of the last PhDs to come out of that. So basically, despite the demand, it's almost as if we're deliberately trying to cut off the circulation supply. You know, we're in intensive care, basically, as a science. I think we can learn a lot of lessons from our other scientific colleagues. So, for example, the biologists have done a fantastic piece of work. They, I suppose, a bit like what Tom has initiated here, is that they started a consortium that was pan-sectoral, that was diverse, that was eclectic in terms of public sector, industry, non-government organisation, representing research councils, and they got together and they had a very detailed conversation like we're beginning to have today, and they eventually then led to a bioeconomy strategy, which was published by BES, basically, and that leads up to 2030. So we're sort of a couple of steps behind, but there's a model that we can follow. I think there's a couple of pieces of research that the Geolsoc or whoever it's agreed needs to do to basically inform a case for that piece of work starting. I think we need to have an assessment of, not a bit more sophisticated than economic assessment. I think, echoing Ian and Joe's points earlier on, is economic, environmental and social assessment. So basically tying in with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the value of our sector in terms of either green growth or climate adaptation and mitigation, value of. I think I look back to the Geolsoc, the last time they did a skills assessment was back in 2012, again, happy to be corrected. But interestingly, that particular survey didn't survey the public sector. So from my point of view, in the public sector, and this again echoes Joe's points about that sort of behind the scenes diplomacy, even within the public sector, we have a job of work to do to increase our visibility. You know, as a science, in terms of contributing to a whole series of laws, policies and strategies. Just to name a few, picking up on what Ian said: climate change, industrial strategy, energy, water, heat, raw materials, green growth. I could go on. So I think what I would like to see, I know you don't want to look at solutions. We know what our problem is and realised that, as I say, 16 years ago. And there's lots of examples that we can give you how we're tackling that. But really, the sector needs to sit down and decide what it actually wants to achieve as an outcome at the end of this process, and then work backwards. I think to use the word marketing is actually a simplistic assessment of what the exercise is actually much more multi-layered, whether it's with the school sectors, with the public, with industry, with the research councils, with policymakers, both officials and politicians. And whilst all of us in our own day jobs and organisations do that with our own programmes, I think we need to be organised. And I mean, I think just like to echo the fact that the Geolsoc, whilst it is a geological society, it represents geoscience, so the diversity in the science. So rather than all the historical arguments between geologists and geographers, etc., what we need to do is basically, you know, divided we stand type thing. So we united together, I think we should agree a strategy, the key people that need to be around that table, and the key areas that we need to tackle. But tinkering with parts of the syllabus, be it primary, secondary, university, I think it actually is a higher level, back to that philosophical, ethical. And I know there are teachers on the chat burning to sort of, you know, and there are some brilliant examples going across the country, and I want to really celebrate the collaborations that are between the teachers, the organisations. I mean, in the Geological Survey of Northern Ireland, we couldn't run some of our events without the help of Methodist College Belfast. You know, we're involved with Science Festival, one of the key science festivals every year in the Northern Ireland calendar. And we're literally standing shoulder to shoulder with Methodic College teachers and students and other organisations. So we have sort of realised that in Northern Ireland, we sort of, you know, have to shoulder, you know, Three Musketeer type thing. And we've used that collaboration to leverage, you know, other people's time, other expertise and input. And I think when it comes to bigger, you know, the questions that you want to tackle about primary school syllabus, lack of science, for example, to get me started. Secondary school, you know, the coursework versus the exams. Students are sitting now, they're basically consumers. Would you want to put 100% exam or field trip when you could do X percentage in coursework? If it is a sort of an economies of scale and a time investment thing. So they're sort of thinking, you know, like consumers. And of course, you have the Extinction Rebellion issue in the background. And in, you know, in our day, the key employers were the mineral exploration industry, the, you know, petroleum exploration industry. That has changed dramatically. So those young people actually are having an ethical question about their career. So we need to echo those messages and pick up on some of their concerns. And I think perhaps best to leave it at that, because I know Catherine is keen to come in. I'm conscious of time.
So no small task then. No small task. We'll sort it out in a couple of days. We'll be finished soon. It's a big job. We've got a big job ahead of us. Catherine, I'm really keen to get your insight on this. You know, what are your views from within the secondary school geography, you know, kind of world? What's your views?
Well, it's been interesting that there's been a lot of comments coming up in the chat that I'm going to agree with, because I think there's a lot of people that are feeling the same things. Yeah, there is a lack of awareness of geoscience and a perception it's all about rocks, and people don't necessarily know about the breadth and the depth, but there's other big issues, some of which are definitely to do with aspiration and some that are very practical. You've got to think about, you know, the other options that are facing young people and are going to seem maybe more exciting and more relevant at the moment because of the way the geoscience is being presented. For example, in my school, we've done a lovely collaboration between several departments on plastic pollution in the oceans. I teach in a coastal town. It's really relevant to the children. They're excited to go off and do things like marine biology and oceanography because they can see that there's an issue and they can see that they would make a difference. And that is really aspirational for them. There's also the fact that the geography courses have changed. I don't know how much people in the audience know about what's happened with exam reform, but the specifications now, they're very varied. There are some specs which are going to have a lot more physical geography in than others, but generally there's quite a big emphasis now on the human geography, and the physical geography had gone through a phase of being really quite adventurous. At GCSE, I was teaching my children about deserts in quite a lot of detail. Mountains was a fantastic topic, but we're back now to natural hazards, living world and UK landscapes, where in UK landscapes, children have the teachers have a choice of teaching two of rivers, coasts and ice. And so things have sort of, you know, changed quite a lot in recent years because of exam reform. And also there's, you know, all the time there's this link to human interaction. So I think what Ian was saying about making that link between geology and things like cities is so crucial. Looking at the textbooks as well, I'm a textbook author, and to be honest, a lot of the geology went out of textbooks for a while. There is some creeping back. I was involved in the new Progress in Geography textbook, which is for Key Stage 3. There's some really nice stuff on rocks and soils in there, but that can be an issue if you've got teachers that are lacking confidence. Having a textbook which has got really, you know, really good stuff in it makes a big difference. And that is a big issue, teachers having the confidence. Teachers might be more confident in teaching human geography, and that would be really interesting to do more research into, the level of confidence teachers have in teaching different elements. There's a shortage of geography teachers. I don't know how many people are aware that geography is such a shortage subject at the moment that this year you could get, I think it was over £30,000 as a bursary to do a PGCE in geography because there's such a shortage. So, you know, there's not a lot of us out there. And also, when you then look into that, how many of those people are actually going to be confident in teaching the more geology side of geography? One of the things that's been scaring the living daylights out of me recently is that quite a lot of people training as geography teachers haven't even got a geography degree, maybe not even a geography A level. And people are doing a SKE course and then starting their PGCE, maybe coming from the background of psychology or law or sports studies, are some of the ones I've come across. And then they're going into schools as geography teachers. Are they going to have the confidence to be able to teach, you know, across all of the geography, particularly the more technical aspects of physical geography, where we start looking at the geological context? There's also the fact of affording a geology course. There's some schools would love to run geology courses, but can't afford it. And others would struggle to staff it. I've got an amazing friend who you may have come across, Hafsa Bobber, who is down in Portsmouth, and they have a geology course, and she's worried that when the more experienced teachers leave, there won't be anyone to replace them. Now, Hafsa is also amazing because she has done research into why students from different ethnic backgrounds might not choose to study geography, and she's done that with the Institute of Education. And so it'd be fascinating to find out her opinion on geology because she knows a lot of stuff. So we've got the problems with running geology, and you've also got field work, which is sort of like, you know, fantastic, but also a problem. I've got an amazing NQT starting in September who's been an IT student with us, Jacob Profit. He's fantastic. He just sent me a message just now because he's following this to say it cost him £3,000 to complete his fieldwork for his undergraduate degree. And that's a hell of a lot of money. So whilst fieldwork is wonderful, it's also costly and it could provide a barrier. We've got the issue that some people have been alluding to in the chat about the restructuring of A levels. Students used to do 4 subjects, so maybe they do their maths, physics, chemistry and geology, with geology being oh, I'll give it a go, I might like it, and then they realize they love it and they take it onto the full A level. They can't do that anymore. They only take 3 now for A levels. So that has made a big difference. We've got the issue of people maybe not thinking that geosciences are as important because they've not been flagged up as much as part of STEM, and there's been so much going on in schools with STEM. People might think that it's better to do something like physics and geophysics and just keep with pure sciences. And then, of course, at university, the increase in the tuition fees has made students more risk averse, particularly working class students. They're going to think, am I going to get a job out of this? And they're going to be concerned. Now, one thing that we're thinking about maybe is a lot of this is political, and thinking about things like funding, thinking about things like the structure of examinations. This is political. So maybe there's some lobbying to be done to think about how we can support students in making choices which are going to open up a wide variety of career opportunities for them.
Thank you very much, Catherine. So all three of you then produced some really, really important points. I think I've rounded off this really, really nicely. I'm going to jump in with this question now, and this discussion point, which is coming up a lot in the chat, and it's come up a lot in the contributions over the last couple of weeks. So, and it's about how we actually, you know, kind of present geoscience, earth sciences within the school curriculum, particularly within secondary schools. It's obviously not a distinct subject. It's one, as Ian kind of said earlier, we're deriving, you know, things from biology, chemistry, physics, maths, geography, all the different elements of geography, sometimes from history. It's not really. We've fallen behind the times with STEM and the kind of movement and rebranding of STEM over the last sort of 5 years. And it's, you know, is split across all the different STEM subjects that are really well positioned. Humanities. How do we, you know, not necessarily how, but should geosciences be a distinct subject at maybe Key Stage 3? If it isn't, or even Key Stage 4, and if it isn't, how do we get? Should it be within the curriculum, or should it be something that's funded outside of the curriculum that comes in, like Geobus in Scotland or something like that? That is, you know, kind of going into schools and engaging, kind of taking on the responsibility to kind of engage with schools and with students. You know, how do we balance the kind of the workload that's needed? Yeah, probably best to come in on this to begin with.
I don't know if I'm best to come in on it, but I mean, I think there's two different approaches, and I think we need to, I'm not sure myself which is the best one. One is to disseminate geology across the whole curriculum so that people, and badged, so that when people meet it in chemistry, they know it's geology, and when they meet it in physics, they know it's geology, etc. In Australia, in Western Australia, they had this thing a few years ago where they took away geology, essentially the advanced level in school, and all the geologists were up in arms. But actually what it did is they integrated it with environmental science, and they called it Earth and Environmental Science. It meant that far more people did it, and they saw an increase in the number going to geology. What we did in the UK and in Scotland is we got rid of geology at the advanced level, and we put it into a course called Environmental Sciences, where geology wasn't badged, it was just amorphosized through. So if you lose the identity, then that's critical. The flip side is you really bolster the geoscience, the geology part that's taught. And the reason why that is important was one of the other statistics that Chris King and Pete Loader would tell you is that when the Earth Science Teachers Association did a survey of about 3,000 kind of students, something like 40% of the students that took geology A level went on to do geology. And this has been a real problem that people haven't recognized in industry and in universities, where lots of people say, well, I'm a geologist, I didn't do A level, so what's the, you know, we can find it. You know, as you said, something like half the people coming into our geology courses have done A level. That means they know what it's all about. They know it's not just dinosaurs and volcanoes. Yeah. And the real critical loss, and I think Catherine alluded to this, is the loss of the AS. So when you had 4 A levels, you could take one as a risky one. You would maybe drop it. You would start to take it. And then you'd meet this inspirational teacher. And Natasha sent round a poll earlier week, and right in the middle is inspirational teacher. They'd meet this inspirational teacher. They had no intention of doing geology. And before they know it, by the end of the year, they've dropped something else. They've taken geology and they're off. Almost everyone in this chat has probably had an inspirational teacher, probably a geology teacher has done it. And so we have to be really careful. And as Mary was saying, you know, we're losing these people. They're going out, and we're not replacing them. So we have a real problem here, but if we want to keep that identity in geology, then we as a community need to really invest in that. And that's been known about for years, and it's just been neglected for years.
Yeah, no. Natasha, do you want to come in on this point?
Yeah, I mean, as Ian said, I mean, again, I think that Catherine's the best to advise on how practical some of this stuff is for schools. But I think most geologists would say, yes, please, to having geology taught as a standalone topic. Of course we would. There's a current consultation on for a GCSE in natural history, and some of my colleagues were like, yes, this is us. And then we realized it was completely ecology and conservation. And geology doesn't even come into natural history, it seems. So it is really, really crucial these conversations happen. And we do feel that there's been a kind of failure. Someone, I can't remember who mentioned that there'd been a failure of kind of central lobbying to keep geoscience a very important part of the curriculum. And we at Hull feel that's strongly the case. And I think, as Ian mentioned about this thing about the inspirational teachers, you know, it really highlights how this problem is at every level. You know, yes, we want to engage young children, but actually everyone's engaged by dinosaurs and fossils and volcanoes. That isn't actually the crucial age. The crucial age is when they're 13, 14, 15, when they're choosing their subjects that they're going to study for the rest of their life. Yeah, that's when we need to have the right people in the right places. And if we don't have, as Catherine just eloquently put, we are losing geography teachers. We are losing geography teachers who have an understanding of geology. I have a close friend who did earth science at degree level and then went on to become a geography teacher. And she's sad that she hardly ever gets to talk about geology. There simply isn't enough time for it in her curriculum. And that is a really significant problem that there is no easy solution to, but we need progressive leadership from people like the Geological Society to do that lobbying, to bring together groups like ESTA and UG UK to make sure that those groups are supported and heard.
So Catherine, how do you make time for it? How is time created within, you know, within either within geography and humanities or within the sciences and STEM subjects kind of between that 13 to 16, 14 to 16 age group?
Right, okay, I'm going to be blunt and practical. Key Stage 3 curriculum, you're not going to be able to get geology in there as a separate subject. It's so crowded already. It's very difficult to find the time to teach all the things that you want to anyway. Now, the way things work at the moment, I don't know if people here, I don't know how much people know about education, but there's something called Progress 8, which schools are judged on if they're in the state sector. And Progress 8, you basically get points for your school if the children do well in particular subjects, and maths and English are prioritised in that. And so you need a lot of time in the curriculum for maths and English, and then other subjects are sort of fitted in around that. And the Key Stage 3 curriculum is very tight. The national curriculum does already have elements of geology in it. It has, for example, in geography, there's geological timescales that was introduced in the most recent national curriculum. And so what I think is the answer is integrating geology better into Key Stage 3 geography and science curriculums, but also why not get into maths? Why not get into English? In English, my English department fortunately has a teacher who taught geography for a little bit, and she's passionate about it. And when she reads things like some of the Seamus Heaney poems and things like that, she's bringing in things like, you know, things about climate and things about geology all the time. What we do in my school is, because I do like a bit of geology, in year 7, we're based in Somerset, and so we have a scheme of learning called Somerset Rocks. And the students look at the geology of Somerset, and then we look at the landforms in Somerset, and whoa, they're interrelated. The geology shapes the landforms, and then we look at the drainage, we look at the rivers, we look at the coastline. We take them to a town called Watch It, where there's amazing geology that they can see. You know, they can see the cliffs crumbling. I went to visit a couple of weeks ago, and the caravan park's nearly falling off the edge at the moment because of the cliffs eroding. And they can look at those rocks, they can hit them together, they can see how the mudstone falls into bits when you hit it with the limestone. They get really excited. So we do that in year 7, we do that in geography. So integrating into the geography programme, I think, can make a massive difference. And then at Key Stage 4, you have schools that deliver GCSE geology. In fact, one of the schools in the Multi-Academy Trust that I'm in is starting that in September. The trouble with this, again, progress 8. Students have different, we call them buckets. So you've got basically your buckets that students have to fill to get the points for the school to get progress 8 scores, which then are used to judge whether the school's any good or not. So you have to have students filling up their EBAC buckets, the EBAC subjects, geography, history, French, science. So the students have to do a certain number of those subjects to be able to get the EBAC, to get the good progress 8. And so if you said to my school, how about you introduce GCSE geology, they might be concerned that that would mean students wouldn't take geography, which is an EBAC subject, so it doesn't count. It does count in the last bucket of progress 8, but you do have to fill those other ones first. Now, this might sound crazy to people that aren't in the education world, but we work within these constraints. We have a massive accountability system over our heads, and so that can cause issues. And again, a lot of this is political, a lot of this is decisions on accountability. And one thing that's interesting is, of course, that independent schools don't have the same constraints that state schools have. So I'm wondering if things like the new natural science GCSE, people are saying, whoa, this looks great, but will state schools dare have it when it doesn't contribute to the EBAC bucket on progress 8? Will it dilute science too much? Will it be the independent schools doing it? Is this just another way where we end up with more division?
Thank you so much. I mean, I just want to highlight here, obviously we've got a global audience to be, and this is there's, there are people watching from all 4 corners of the world, and what we're talking about is obviously very focused on the UK, but like I said at the start, I hope that some of the conversations we're having do resonate into other, the challenges that in other countries, in the education systems, at kind of primary, secondary education, early years education as well. And this is hopefully the whole point of this event, remember, was just to inspire people to think about this in your region, in your country, in your field. So hopefully that's exactly what it's done. Remember, we're not here to pose solutions. We're here to just get this insight from all these different kind of spectrum of education and industry and science. So I'm just going to pull up another point here. I'm going to ask this to Murray and the rest of you. So because we haven't got that much longer left. There's with it, obviously school is and teachers within and I've seen a lot in the chat that we're inspired by our teacher. That's one of the things that really drives us to do, to go on and to study at a more advanced level. What are the other really kind of key inputs that we're getting, particularly between the ages of 14 and 16? And how can we use those? How can we kind of tinker with those inputs to kind of get a message across, either extracurricular outside of schools, or from mainstream social media, which nowadays is, like just as it is general society, it also forms the opinion and of a lot of teenagers. How can we kind of use those, or not necessarily how, but what impact do you think those kind of other inputs have on students of that age? Mary, what's your thought on that?
I suppose just to say that on the inspirational teacher thing, it was my physical geographer A-level teacher that was my inspiration, and I entered geology accidentally. I actually enrolled for a geography degree, and then because the modular system ended up doing geology. I think then a big attraction to geology, apart from employability, was also the opportunity to do fieldwork and travel, the outdoors. And I know that's tampered now with the carbon miles. So I'm just wondering if perhaps we could address that with tree planting initiatives associated with geoscience degree programs, or some other footprint initiative in terms of the university. In terms of the schools, I think, I know you want us to look at a particular age group, but I do think it has to be systemic. And I know that's not popular, but for example, in Northern Ireland, there is no pure science in the curriculum. If I was in charge tomorrow, that would be reintroduced. So there is a world around us. And what we have done as a survey, along with the British Geological Survey, Earth Science Ireland as was, and other collaborators, sat down with people like Catherine and established a working group and consulted teachers to see what they wanted, and devised a series of resources specifically for primary school teachers, which is now accredited by the examination board in Northern Ireland, and released 800 schools, including the rock kits that have been mentioned in the chat. And so basically this is literally an off-the-shelf 4-modular primary school resource, including Planet Earth, Dynamic Earth, Violent Earth, and Future Earth. And picking up on some of the data science AI type things that you mentioned earlier. And so that was to try and look after the primary. So if we could help build the capacity of the primary school teachers, you would open the eyes of those people in their formational years to think about the world around us, okay? So then in secondary school, because the call from the teachers was, we need more case studies, we need STEM ambassadors, events, we need data sets like the TELUS data set, we need GIS data sets that we can play with. Come back to your issue earlier. The majority of our data, to be perfectly honest, in Northern Ireland is open data. And the only data that we actually, the only time we charge is when we actually need geoscientific IPR input into your advice. So in terms of, so working with the schools, teachers, the examiners, so SIA in our case, but also we have text on the OCR textbook, including TELUS data, so for the Welsh syllabus. In terms of the schools, we had to decide strategically what was the biggest bang for our buck. So in Northern Ireland, there's a science discovery centre called W5, shout out to W5, and they attract 350,000 visitors per year, 55,000 of which are school children. And Ian has come across multiple occasions and launched things for us, given talks, not only W5, but at the schools, and has been really supportive when we needed him. He was there for us. And so we have 3 exhibits with W5, and they are now planning a brand new natural earth environment exhibit, which they were actually hoping to open this summer because of COVID, but there's a slight delay on that. So 20 years in existence. So you're basically visually in the space of all those young people on their school trips. So that was another strategy. And then of course with the universities, we'll have internships, we'll have work experience, we'll have PhD supervision, we'll have sponsorships, we'll actually have research calls, and we'll actually have co-bid for projects. So at every facet, we've been working, but we take our lean from those key stakeholders. So rather than coming in with what you think is the best thing to do, ask, which is what they're all burning to tell us on the chat. But I think something that hasn't been mentioned here in terms of diversity is perhaps, and I need to be careful the language I use, is basically presenting our science so that it's, because I know it's very, very popular with those who have autism. And it's a very sensory subject, it's a very visual subject. And I know just by listening to people who work in the health, speech and therapy specialists and the health boards here, that the outdoors, so diversity, not just race, not just gender, but special needs, okay, is what I would encourage. And something that hasn't been mentioned to date is apprenticeships. We all know, everybody has said we're an applied subject. And I know there's further education colleges across the whole of the UK. I've had a look at their courses. There's lots of computing, lots of civil engineering, lots of data science, very few geoscience. I think that's an opportunity. That would target your post-16. So either A, they do an apprenticeship, so they're funded, and they may choose to do a degree or a master's or a PhD, or they may just do 3 years and then get their job with their company. But that lends itself to site investigation, contaminated land, environmental consultancies, all that whole sector of professional services that exists out there that desperately need geoscientists. And if we can't get them through the university system, the demand is still there, so we have to come up with plan Bs and Cs. So I would be looking at multiple baskets with multiple eggs, but trying to influence at the highest level. And if it was possible to get agreement from government down that we could have a bespoke subject, like Ian has said, earth environmental sciences, we should still keep that on the table. It might be harder to achieve, but there are examples. So here we've got agriculture GCSE, obviously driven by the agricultural industry and the huge department here. We have a tourism GCSE. So geography is actually under threat because of a tourism and travel GCSE, which is the perception is that it's easier, but it's a big industry, £1 billion industry here in Northern Ireland. So I think we need to really listen to, as well as the teachers' industry, the skills list. We know what do they want, what skills are absent, and to try and have a rounded approach to the best young people coming through. And it's not necessarily exclusively university.
That point on apprenticeships is a really, really interesting point, and one obviously that could take students around 14, 16 age down a different path at that point, you know, from college and into, you know, potentially not getting to university till slightly later, but getting into industry first and being able to pick up on the skills that are actually needed within the industry. So I think that's a really interesting point, and one hopefully that will stimulate some chat on it. Ian, do you want to come in on any of the points you've heard so far?
I was thinking I should come in on the media side. It's not been mentioned much, but it's been mentioned a lot in the chat. And my view might be surprised, because I don't think the media is the answer, really. And I say that for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is actually there's quite a lot of geoscience. Geoscience does pretty well on the box compared to most other sciences. And for those who disagree with that, I would say one word, and that's chemistry. The last time chemistry had a series or a kind of show on thing was 10 years ago, and it was presented by a nuclear physicist. And so we don't hear chemists kind of talking about, oh, we need kind of more. I think that the reality is the reason chemistry is not such a problem is because it's got a clear place in the curriculum, it's got an identity, and it's got a clear place in the public kind of recognition. They think they know what chemists are. So I think that brings us back to the fact that actually it's up to us to kind of set out our stall in a way that is really clear about what we do. And the other reason why I don't think communication and the media is because it's so fragmented. So the demographics that we're after are not watching television programs, or at least if they are, they're not watching them the way that we normally do it. The internet and all of the social media is completely transformed. And we don't understand. I say this as a kind of 55-year-old male. I do not understand most of that kind of social media that's emerging. So we need to be a lot more savvy. We need to use a lot of our earlier career researchers who are more there. I still think that a lot of our social media is still within the bubble. Our blogging and our tweeting and all of this, it still sits within it, but at least it's a lot better than it was 5-10 years ago. So I think if we are talking about the media, it's not a panacea, it's not going to help us out. We need to change what we've got control over, and what we've got control over is our immediate context, and we can do that certainly from the university sector. I think the universities need to look at their own backyard, fix that. Then I think we can start to look a little bit broader and think about, you know, the industry one side and schools the other side. But equally, you know, those in education, you know, education's incredibly complicated, the media incredibly complicated, the industry incredibly. These are not going to be short, easy fixes. I think we need to understand the systems we're working in and change that. And as I say, the easiest change is to make close to home.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
Can I leap in, Tom?
Yeah, of course, please do.
Yeah, because I think it is tricky to say that, you know, education needs to fix itself, industry needs to fix itself. I think what Marie said about it being strategic and led at a really high level is so important, because academics are under huge pressure, teachers are under huge pressure. Industry right now isn't having a great time. And I think that it's part of the reason that we are in this problem is that everyone has trying to be fixing it within their bubble. But for whatever reason, these great initiatives, I mean, Marie mentioned some great initiatives, other people have mentioned great initiatives in this panel today, they're not coming together and gelling and working in a big way. And I think that it is really tricky, because yes, we do have to be fixing what's in our backyard and what we can change, but actually some people are really restricted in what they're able to do in that space. And also a point that Marie made about, you know, apprenticeships and skills is so important, and we need to be really transforming how we're doing education, particularly at university level, so that things like accreditation are looked at very progressively. Do we need, and this is controversial because I really enjoy my mapping, do we need all students to have done 6 weeks of geological mapping to be a geologist? I worked in industry for 7 years and I never once made a geological map. You know, you've just spent a long time here, Tom, talking about all the amazing business applications of geoscience. What are the actual skills that geoscientists need in the modern world? And are our degrees really reaching out to that? Are our degrees fit for purpose? Are our geology degrees as attractive as they should be to students who want to go into this brave new world? And, you know, are we meeting the skills that modern geoscientists need? And I think this all comes back to this strategic overview where industry and academia have to talk to each other and have to work together. And coming back to another thing about jobs, people on the chat have been mentioning about families. And this is really important, and it's an important barrier in some ways, and it's an important way in. We have to understand that we're not just talking to young people, we're talking to their parents and to their families. And in some cases, this is why we're not being as diverse as we could, because a lot of people in my quick poll on Twitter said that a supportive member of family was the reason that they had gone into geoscience, or they had known a geologist. So that means that maybe if people don't have supportive families who are trying to encourage them to look outside and take them on family holidays to the Grand Canyon, maybe we're completely cutting off a whole area of society. But also, we aren't doing enough to really brand ourselves and reach areas that are diverse enough. So I just lost completely my train of thought. But yeah, so I think accreditation needs to be more progressive. And I think that job prospects need to be, oh yeah, that was it. So parents are really important. At open days, the parents are the ones that you grab with the job prospects. When you show them your Geological Society poster of all the jobs that are geoscience of the future, it's the parents who are engaged by that. They're the ones who are like, oh my God, I didn't know that geoscientists could do so many jobs. And that's crucial as well. And that comes back to the whole perception of society. It's not just the young people, it's also people around them that help them make those decisions. So that was a bit bumbling, but you get the point.
Thank you. All of you have spoken really, really well on the subject, and I think we've got the mixed insight that I was hoping for. And everyone, the chat has just been going completely mental, which is, I think kind of indicative really of just how everyone wants to contribute towards this. We are all aware of the of the challenges that we face within the geo community, within the decline in students, within our image problem, within our issues around inclusivity, diversity. I think we are aware of it, but it's in our bubble, it's in our own kind of space. Catherine, do you want to come in?
I was just going to say, could I just say a couple of things quickly on the media bit, if I'm dead fast? One thing is thinking about media content. The days have changed in lessons. I used to be able to get away with whapping Professor Ian Stewart on for an hour in a lesson and sitting back and us all going, ooh, but I'd get shot for that now. What we're after now in lessons is little, short bits that we can use. Powerful knowledge is a massive thing in education at the moment, in geography education. And what we benefit from is experts sharing their powerful knowledge. Now, you might have come across the guys that are doing Time for Geography, which is a website which is lots of short clips. It's all done with universities. There's a brilliant one by a geologist in Cardiff whose name slips my mind, Rhea, I think it is, on the structure of the earth. And those are the sort of things that we can introduce the topic, and then we can show a short video, and we've got the experts there from the universities who are going to put their knowledge across. Also, engage with geography teachers, you guys, on social media, because Team Geography is really big on Twitter. There's loads of us that quite often we're such geeks. We're always having a little chat about different things. So the only geologist that I know of who really engages with that is Pete Loader, and it's brilliant. And I recommend the Earth Learning Ideas website, which is from Esther, really frequently. I see people are chatting about like, oh, how could I teach about volcanoes? And I'm like, try this website. So if you guys could follow some geographers, jump in on our conversations, we'll make you really welcome.
Thanks, Catherine. Bridging the knowledge gap with geography teachers, with STEM teachers within secondary school, primary school is something that I think we all need to engage in more. Okay, well, I'm going to start to wrap it up now. I don't know where the last 3 hours have actually gone. Thank you all very much for joining me on this final session. We probably could have gone on for the rest of the day, to be honest. And next, what happens next with all this? Well, I think we really need to, kind of create a much more of a forum for this, to be completely honest. I think we really need to push forward now in getting this conversation, this discussion, this debate heard more, to bring in more messages, more insight from schools, from universities, from industry, from academia, so that we can, kind of continue the conversation in another medium. I'm going to look at creating a podcast series, which hopefully brings in a bit more, again, continues the discussion in another environment. There is a LinkedIn group that is set up for literally for this exact purpose. I've just put it into the chat now. Please do sign up to that, and we can basically carry on the discussion. So I'm just hopefully put that into LinkedIn. The final kind of point I want to raise really is that, you know, we haven't had the representation of the BEN community that we absolutely needed on this event. You know, I think we must ensure that moving forward, and hopefully we can do some more events like this. This is something that we ensure we do have that. I think it's so important. So all of the panelists are coming back onto the screen. I'm going to hand over to Alicia, I think, for sort of closing comments. But thank you so much, everyone, to come. Can't believe we had 1,000 people on it. That's pretty impressive. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tom. So for those of you who don't know, I'm Alicia Newton, and I'm Director of Science and Communications at the Geological Society. And I just wanted to take a few minutes to really say thank you to everyone who's made it to the bitter end and just run down a little bit of what you should expect to see coming from the Geological Society and the rest of the community in the next few months. So certainly, I think the chats have all been really wonderful and inspirational, and we're really looking forward to going through them. I mean, going and looking back at everything that's said, it's clear that as a community, we know that geoscience is vital to solving some of the biggest challenges we face. But there's just so much to do in terms of examining the environmental and societal legacies of past activities, and that just has to be addressed to move forward for anything we do now to be meaningful and sincere. I just wanted to highlight once again the many groups that are addressing so many of the issues that have been raised. So obviously the members of our own education committee and Earth Science Teachers Association, they, along with UG UK, are going to be contributing to this event that we've mentioned on the 24th. And although that is a closed event, anyone can express interest in attending. We're trying to keep it small to really get discussion going, but anyone who thinks they can contribute something meaningful is welcome to email us. Just email outreach@geolsoc.org.uk or go to our website to find out more. And I just wanted to note that so many of the trustees and council members who've spoken today, and certainly what's come up in the chat, is said that there needs to be a coordinated effort between all of the various groups that can do a little bit or can do a little bit that needs to be amplified. And the Geological Society is really committed to playing a role in bringing together these groups to work to address the perception and uptake of the earth sciences, and also to create a collective voice that can amplify and expand all the work that's going on. And we're really looking forward to delivering on that responsibility in the coming weeks and months, and stay tuned for many things that we have to offer. And thanks. Tom, do you want to say a final word?
Yeah, just a couple of points. So we need to continue this conversation. Let's all get into this LinkedIn group. I can't just be me or one or two other individuals that kind of, you know, really stimulate conversation, discussion there. Please use it. Everybody is passionate, as you've been in the chat and the panelists here today, to keep pushing forward you know, this kind of movement. We need to turn it from a movement into action. Loads of comments about when are we going to actually do something about this? What are the actions we take? You know, what's the plan? Well, as I made the point at the start of this, we've got to do a lot more digging. We've got to be critical of ourselves, and we've got to examine the existing initiatives that are in place. There are so many of them. You know, there's been some fantastic YouTube videos that have been put into the chat. There's been, you know, individual initiatives that people have been pushing. They're all amazing, but this is the first time that everybody's actually been able to see them. I think that is one of the problems in itself, is that we're not, you know, we need to create that medium, that forum, to be able to talk to each other first, and then work out how we're going to actually create a plan to get this out to the wider society, wider education. So loads of work to do. I hope you've, you know, kind of can see just how much work there is to do. But this event was about starting it off, really kind of getting us all in one place to talk, and then we'll go from here. So let's subscribe for the LinkedIn group, keep this conversation going, keep following the Geolsoc over the next couple of weeks and months, and obviously there'll be more news, more events, and, you know, more information coming out there. And then hopefully we get to a point where we have this kind of social, you know, either social enterprise or, you know, group online that can work towards some solutions for this, and we can all contribute and all put our passion towards it. So 3 hours and 20 minutes later, after starting, it's lunchtime. Well, in England it's lunchtime. God knows what time it is anywhere where you're coming from all over the world. But yeah, thank you so much for joining, and let's see where this goes. So thank you, everybody.